right ahead.
All right, welcome. I'd like to say hello. My name is Mary Jo Sharp. I am a Christian apologist, and I run the website Confident Christianity, and a nonprofit organization as well. I am your moderator for today's debates. This is the first in a series of 4 debates between Christians and Muslims. Today's topic is the Qur'an miraculous? Before we begin, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First of all, to the Glenwood campus of Coastal Community Church for provision of a facility for us to host this debate. Also for their willingness to support this lively and passionate practice of debate. I'd also like to thank Acts 17 Apologetics for organizing the debates, and for our Muslim apologists for being willing to engage in this activity. Our debaters today, on my right, is the Muslim apologist Osama Abdullah. He is creator of the website www.answering-christianity.com, which is one of the largest Muslim apologetic websites on the internet. He has a master's in computer science and is an experienced debater on a variety of topics. On my left is Christian apologist Nabeel Qureshi, co-founder of Acts 17 Apologetics. He is a former Muslim who has a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics from Biola University, is working on a medical doctorate at Eastern Virginia Medical School. He is also an experienced debater covering a variety of topics, including the deity of Jesus and who was Jesus. Today's topic is the Qur'an Miraculous. This is a topic upon which the foundation of the Islamic faith is built. The Muslim holy book is said to be a miraculous gift of God, a perfect revelation to the Prophet Muhammad. However, the skeptic would argue that the Quran is flawed, that it contains errors, scientific errors, errors of transmission, making it historically problematic in the textual integrity of the Quran. So today's discussion will look deeply into the validity of both sides of the claim that the Quran is a perfect revelation of God. The format of our debate will include opening arguments of 30 minutes each, starting with Osama, and then we will have rebuttals, first rebuttals of 15 minutes apiece, followed by 10-minute second rebuttals. We will then have a crossfire of 2 minutes each, 4 rounds of crossfire, and then we will conclude with 5 minutes each. Some final remarks before we let the debaters get up here is please take this time to turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate, to be courteous to our debaters. And also let me remind you that both sides will be presenting material that will push the buttons of the opposing views. Please also be courteous to the debaters at all times. And let me invite you to question what it is you believe and see if it stands up today to the evidence presented. All right, without further ado, Osama, you are first.
Thank you very much, Mary Jo. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's definitely a privilege for me to be here. I'd like to start by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, most beneficent. I start my presentation. قُلْ رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِنْ لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُوا قَوْلِي. O Allah, expand my chest, ease my task for me, and remove the impediment from my speech so that they may understand what I say. My name is Osama Abdullah, as Mrs. Mary Jo mentioned. I'm the owner of www.answering-christianity.com. And today I'm going to be debating Mr. Nabeel on whether the Noble Quran is scientific or not. It is very important to keep in mind throughout this debate that Allah Almighty's choice of specific words was for a divine purpose because they carry deeper meanings in them than any other ordinary Arabic word. To start, let us look at the following divine promise or prophecy from Allah Almighty. That's in Noble chapter 41, verse 53. We will show them our signs in the universe and inside themselves, until it will become quite clear to them that it is the truth. Is it not sufficient as regards your Lord that He is a witness over all things? Now, right off the bat, this noble verse states clearly that the scientific discoveries that Allah Almighty promised are a thing of the future. So right away, this noble verse refutes the question about if the noble Quran was, if the noble Quran was miraculous, then how come the early Muslims were not scientists? The answer is simple. It's because they could not have possessed the knowledge. They were only mere Bedouins, farmers, and illiterate people. Now I'm gonna move right in to the universe, our universe. Noble verse, chapter 51, verses 6 through 8. وإن الدين لواقع والسماء ذات الحبك إنكم لفي قول مختلف. And verily judgment and justice must indeed come to pass by the sky of the hubuk. Truly you are in a doctrine discordant. Now before I get into the word hubuk, let me mention to you that I used several Arabic dictionaries. The biggest one is Lisan al-Arab, which consists of 10 big books describing what the Arabs of old how the Arabs of old understood the Arabic words. So if there's a specific word in the Noble Quran that you'd like to look up, the best source for you is to go to Lisan al-Arab dictionary. It translates as the tongue of the Arabs, and look up the word and see the poems that it was used in, the narrations, the proverbs, etc., the examples, the way people used it. So what does hubuk mean? Well, according to Lisan al-Arab dictionary, book 6, page number 21, and also the Muhit dictionary, page 862, and also Al-Wasit dictionary, Marjam al-Wasit, and other dictionaries, al-hubuk means ash-shad, which means to pull or to attract. Al-hubuk means ash-sha'r al-ja'd al-mutakassir, a curly and broken hair. Al-hubuk, an example of it, hubbika ash-sha'r, means ju'ida, made the hair curly. Al-hubuk also means tara'iq al-nujum, the paths of the celestial bodies. Al-hubuk means al-mahbuk, ma ujida amalu, what has been perfected or done successfully. Mahbuk also means qawiyyun shadid, strong and mighty. Al-hubuk also means ajada nasjuh, weaved it with mastery. Also nasij, which is one of the meanings of it, means web. And hibak means siyaj, fence, means fence, and muhtabik means interwoven or intersecting. Well, here's Allah Almighty said that our universe is a universe of hubuk. Well, here's a picture of NASA, from NASA, computer-generated NASA picture, that shows the universe. And it does look like exactly the way the way the words were defined in the Arabic dictionaries. The way the Arabs of old understood them, exactly this is how the universe looks like. It does look like a curly, broken hair, and it does look like a web, and all the other things that I mentioned. Moving on. And also, by the way, quoting NASA and also here ScienceDaily.com, probing the cosmic web of the universe, new light on dark energy. It says here, the technique is based on well-known phenomena, namely the fact that apparent motion of distant galaxies results from the two effects, the global expansion of the universe that pushes the galaxies away from each other, and the gravitational attraction of matter present in the galaxy's neighborhood that pulls them together, creating the cosmic web. The cosmic web. This is what NASA and ScienceDaily.com are saying, not me. Creating the cosmic web of large-scale structures. Moving on, looking at Noble verse, chapter 55, verse 37. فَإِذَا انشَقَّتِ السَّمَاءُ فَكَانَتْ وَرْدَةً كَالدِّهَانِ. When the sky splits asunder or explodes and turns rose-colored like paint. Well, I believe here, the sama here, the heaven or the sky is referring to our solar system, because Allah Almighty referred to our sky, that includes our sun and our moon and our planets as sama. So Allah Almighty is saying that when our sky, when our galaxy, when our solar system explodes, it will look like a red, it will look like a rose-colored light paint. Well, lo and behold, here's also a NASA-generated picture. This is a NASA-captured picture, rather. I think I have this upside down, doesn't really matter. Actually, no, I have it like this. Okay. This is the right way to look at it. This is an exploded galaxy that NASA captured from space. And when our galaxy explodes, it's going to look something like this. And guess what? It looks like a rose. Okay? And the Noble Quran said it. Moving on. Noble verse, chapter 41, verse 10. Or rather, chapter 41, verse 12. I'm sorry, chapter 41, verses 11 through 12. ثم استوى إلى السماء وهي دخان فقال لها وللأرض آتيا طوعا أو كرها قالتا أتينا طائعين فقضاهن 7 سماوات في يومين وأوحى إلى في كل سماء أمرها. Moreover, he comprehended his design in his design the sky, and it had been as smoke. He said to it and to the earth, "Come ye together, willingly or unwillingly." This is, by the way, symbolic, because Allah Almighty, when the earth is not like us. The earth communicates with Allah Almighty in its own way that Allah Almighty created for it. They said, the earth and our universe or our sky, we do come together in willing obedience. And here, so Allah Almighty here said that in the 4th day, He comprehended, He finished creating our earth. Because Allah Almighty created the entire universe in six days. 6 God days, not our days. And on the 4th day, our solar system and the earth were finished. And but there were remnants of smoke. And I did not capture a picture for this, but the scientists, the Space Atlas, Heather and Hembest book, page 50, and also Horizons Exploring Universe Seeds, plate 9, from Association of Universities for Research in Anatomy Incorporated. They say the universe, they say a new star forming out of cloud of gas and dust, nebula, which is one of the remnants of the smoke that was the origin of the whole universe. So God Almighty said that the universe, or our solar system, was still smoky after its creation, because after the Big Bang there was a lot of smoke in the universe, and God Almighty said it, and again science confirmed it. And speaking of the Big Bang Theory, here's a Big Bang Theory. Noble verse, chapter 21, verse 30. I'm going to talk about the Big Bang Theory and the cosmic crunch. Do not the unbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were joined together, and then they were clothed, and then we clothed them asunder, we exploded them. We made from water every living thing. Will they not then believe? And also in Noble verse, chapter 51, verse 47, it's talking about the universe currently expanding. Okay? And the firmament, we constructed it with power and skill, and verily we are expanding it. لَمُوسِعُونَ is a verb of the Arabic noun wasi', vast. Musi'un meaning we're making it vaster, bigger, larger. And it's a continuous process. And here's a recent discovery from NASA that is only 8 years old. This is the cosmic crunch in the Noble Quran and in NASA. In Noble Quran, chapter 21, verse 104, the day that we roll up the heavens like a scroll rolled up for books, even as we produce the first creation, so shall we produce a new one. God talked in another noble verse that He will create another earth, and that earth we will resurrect from. There will be another Big Bang. So shall we produce a new one. A promise we have undertaken, truly shall we fulfill it. Well, here's what NASA is. If you go to map.gsfc.nasa.gov/universe/uni_shape, that's uni_shape, universe_shape.html. Okay? If you go there, here's what NASA says. the simplest version for the inflationary theory, an extension of the Big Bang Theory predicts that the density of the universe is very close to the critical density, and that the geometry of the universe is flat like a sheet of paper. God said He will roll the universe in the cosmic crunch like the scrolls are rolled. And NASA, just 8 years ago, said that the universe is flat like a sheet of paper. That is the result confirmed by WMAP science. So it's a confirmed fact. It's not just a theory. And I give it a link. Go back to the video and rewind, and you can get the URL. Moving on, Allah Almighty talked about the earth losing all of its water, become completely dry, absolutely dry. وَإِنَّ لَجَعَلُونَ مَا عَلَيْهَا صَعِيدًا جَرْزًا. This is Noble Verse, chapter 18, verse 8. And we will surely reduce whatever on earth to dry dust. Well, according to Wikipedia.org, if you look up the earth, it'll say that eventually, it says here, after 1 billion years, the earth will eventually lose all of its water. It will become absolutely waterless. Moving on, fertilizing winds create the rain. Allah Almighty said in Noble Verse, chapter 15, verse 22, and we sent the fecundating or fertilizing winds, then caused the rain to descend from the sky, therein providing you with water through, etc. And here, Allah Almighty said in Arabic, وَأَرْسَلْنَا الرِّيَاحَ لَوَاقِحَ فَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً. I read it in English first. Well, here's what Wikipedia says, and other scientific websites as well. The growth of clouds and precipitation require that the winds fertilize the clouds with a quantity of microscopic particles called condensation nuclei. The smallest droplet of water is made up of at least 100 molecules. It is not easy for such a number to come together by a mere coincidence without there being nuclei to precipitate upon. And here also they say also coalescence is a process by which two or more droplets or particles merge during contact to form a single daughter droplet, female droplet, or bubble. That's what Wikipedia says. The miracle of the moon, moving on. Before moving on to the miracle of the moon, because there are several noble verses that talk about the moon, there are many lies that were invented against Islam. One of them is that we believe in the moon god. Well, here's what Allah Almighty said about the moon. Among His noble verse, chapter 41, verse 37, among His signs are the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. Adore not the sun and the moon, but adore God, who created them, if it is Him ye wish to serve. Okay, moving on. The S-shaped loops of the moon around the Earth. That's been confirmed by NASA and many scientists, and that is why we have eclipses, because the moon intersects the course, the orbit of the sun. The reason why it comes between the Earth and the sun is because its loop, its orbit around the Earth is like a number 8, or S loops. Allah Almighty said in Noble Verse, chapter 36, verse 39. Now remember, Arabic does not have any letter that resembles the English letter S. Okay, so back then, the closest thing that Allah could compare this to was a dry date tree branch. And I provided 63 pictures, 63 pictures of date tree branches that resemble the English letter S on my website. You can check it out yourself, answering-christianity.com. Let me read the noble verse. وَالْقَمَرُ قَدَّرْنَاهُ مَنَازِلَ حَتَّى عَادَ كَالْعُرْجُونِ الْقَدِيمِ. That's noble verse, chapter 36, verse 39. And the moon, we destined it to return in stages until it comes back like a dried out branch of date tree. And like I mentioned, Arabic and Arabia in general does not have any letter that resembles the English letter S, or the number 8 in English. So there was no other thing to compare the orbit of the moon to. This was the closest thing Allah Almighty could use. And according to astronomy, Ohio University, State University's Astronomy Department, and Reference.com, and also Columbia Electronic Encyclopedia, and also many pictures and animations, GIF files that I copied, they were free, and I copied on my website from physicsforum.com and others. They state that the moon's orbit around the Earth is in S-shaped loops. And I have animations, 2 animations that demonstrate the moon's loop. Moving on. The moon reflects the light of the sun. Allah Almighty said in Noble Verse chapter 10 verse 5, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ الشَّمْسَ ضِيَاءً وَالْقَمَرَ نُورًا وَقَدَّرَهُ مَنَازِلَ إِلَى etc. It is He, Noble Verse chapter 10 verse 5, it is He who made the sun to be a source of light, and the moon to be reflecting to the light of beauty, etc. We find in Tafsir Ibn Kathir, who's Tafsir means interpretation. We find in the interpretation of Ibn Kathir, a prominent and leading Muslim scholar in the 13th century. Okay, so this was many hundred years ago, before the Earth was discovered to be round. The following, we discovered the following about the moon, that the moon has different emissions of light, from looking like a crescent to a half moon to a full moon, etc. Here, Ibn Kathir says, He created the night with its darkness and the day with its light, and they alternate without ceasing. And He created the sun with its shining light and the moon with its reflected light. And He allotted their stages and gave them separate orbits in heavens. There's another quote, but it's a little lengthy. I'm not going to link it. I'm not going to mention it for a time. But you can go to my website and check out the Moon Miracle and article and see it yourself. They're also here. Okay, moving on here. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, also the splitting of the moon miracle. Allah Almighty said in Noble Verse, chapter 54, verse 1, وَاقْتَرَبَتِ السَّاعَةِ وَانْشَقَّ الْقَمَرُ. The hour of judgment approaches, and has approached, and the moon has been cracked or split. Okay, and here is a picture from NASA. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I forgot to show you the S-shaped, my apology, for the day tree branches. This is a day tree, a picture of the day tree branch, folks, and this is an emphasized one. Okay, the same picture, but I emphasize it. Notice the S shapes of the branches. Here's the original ones. Here's the ones that I emphasize. I hope the camera catches them, but you can see the S-shaped emphasis that I made. Okay, so that's that, and as to the moon cracking. Here's a NASA picture of the moon. There's a line, as you can see here in the picture. This line, NASA says, is as deep, it goes all the way around, 10 minutes, thank you. Goes all the way around the moon. And this line that you see is as deep as the Grand Canyon. Okay, so it's not, it's not shallow, it's very deep. And they say because the moon has cracked from ancient moon quakes, like we have earthquakes, the moon had violent moon quakes and it caused it to crack. And God Almighty mentioned it. Okay, the geology of the earth and its shape and movement. Gonna skip this. Okay. Allah Almighty said in Allah Almighty said that the earth is spherical. In Noble Verse, chapter 79, verses 79, chapter 79, verses 30 and 31. وَالْأَرْضُ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا أَخْرَجَ مِنْهَا مَاءَهَا وَمَرْعَاهَا. And the earth, moreover, has he dahaha, and he drawed from it its water and his pasture. According to Lisan al-Arab dictionary, dahaha means dafa'ahu wa rama bih, cause it to move, pushed, or through it. Okay, so Allah Almighty pushed the earth in space. And here's an example. Allah Almighty said, the noble verse, chapter 37, verses 8 through 9, وَيَقْذِفُونَ مِنْ كُلِّ جَانِبٍ دَحُورًا وَيَقْذَفُونَ مِنْ كُلِّ جَانِبٍ دَحُورًا وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ وَاصِبٌ. And they are, dahura is derived from daha, and they're cast away from every side, repulsed or pushed for they are under a perpetual penalty. Daha as-sabiyyu al-midhata, ay dafa'a as-sabiyyu al-midhata, means daha, the boy has daha, the rolling toy, meaning that the boy pushed the rolling toy, so he pushed it. Dahraja means to roll down. Okay, so again, the earth is moving in space. And also daha, try and pass through it here. Daha also means daha في الثرى بيتا إذا أوسعه. He expanded the house. Also daha الدحح, which is plural to daha, which means al-ardun al-mumtadda, the expanded earths. Also, so Allah Almighty said He expanded the earth and He caused its water to emerge from it. Well, lo and behold, here's a picture of the earth when our continents look like a jigsaw puzzle, by the way. Okay, if they look like they were all one piece of land, and it's true here. Our earth used to be one piece of land with almost no water in it, very minimum water, and when the water expanded, okay, then when the earth expanded, then the water emerged from it. Okay, of course, our atmosphere has to do with it too. But the point is, the expansion of the earth caused for all the massive amount of waters that we have today, covering 70% of our planet. The reason why we have so much water today is because it has expanded. Also, daha also means made it the best. And one of the companions of the Prophet's name, his name was Dahi al-Kalbi. Okay, and it means the leader or the best one from the group. And if you look at our Earth in our solar system, it is the best planet. I mean, it's the only planet that has water. It's the only planet that has life. It's the only planet that has beautiful scenic views that look like paradise. If you go to Honolulu or Europe or any place, or you come here, you'll see paradise. There's real life in Earth, and so it is the best planet in our solar system. And also, it made it spherical around here. دردحة من النساء التي طولها وعرضها سواء. The dardha from the woman is the one whose height and width look the same. Her height and her width are the same. She looks round. Okay, so and the Earth is round, spherical. Moving on, I'm skipping through things here. There's other meanings here, narrations that talk about the roundness. But I'm going to move on. How many minutes, sir, do I have? I'm sorry, 5? Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Allah Almighty said also, He's moving. The earth is moving and suspended in space. Noble verse, chapter 77, verse 25. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ الْأَرْضَ كِفَاتًا. Okay. Have we not made the earth kifata? Kifata, according to Lisan al-Arab here, book 1, page 807. Kifata, al-kafatu, it means al-kafat. صرفك الشيء عن وجهه. When you push something to a different direction. Also, kifata means yankafitu ay yansarif, to go away. Okay? And al-inkifat means al-insiraf, going away or leaving. Kifata asra fil adu wa tayaran, means speeded in running and flying. Also, kaftun means sari', fast. And kafit, which is derived from kifata, means sari', khafif, daqiq, fast, light, and precise. The Earth's orbit is precise. if it shifts to the right or the left 1 millimeter or 1 meter, I don't know about 1 millimeter, but 1 meter, it'll go in, it'll go astray and with another planet. It'll go away, it'll stray away from its dedicated orbit. Kifata here also yadum wa yaqbut, contains and holds on. Okay, and Earth does contain, and it's also holding on. Al-kafit, al-quwwa ala al-nikah, al-quwwa ala al-jima', etc. Strength and power. I'm gonna skip all that, but anyway, it means everything, all the things that I mentioned here. Wow. Okay. What's next? Okay. Allah Almighty made the earth as cradle. Here, I'm gonna skip to this. Okay. Noble verse, chapter 20, verse 53. الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ مَهْدًا. It is He who has made the earth for you as mahd. Mahd means cradle. The same word used for Jesus Christ in Noble verse, chapter 19, verse 21, when His mother Mary, peace be upon her and Him, when she brought Him to their people, and her people said, "Where'd you bring this child from? You're not married. How did you get pregnant?" And so one of the miracles of Jesus Christ was that He spoke, which removed the scandal from His mother. So otherwise, she wasn't going to get scandalized, And so the word mahd, He spoke from the mahd, from the cradle. He was a toddler, an infant, a suckling baby. Anyway, here, this is a picture of the Earth's orbit, looking like a cradle. Here, the Earth, I'm quoting here, the Earth circles the Sun with its axis tilted 23.5 degrees. That tilt gives us our seasons. When the North Pole points away from the Sun, the Northern Hemisphere experiences winter, and the Southern Hemisphere is summer. On the other side of the orbit, the situation is reversed because the Earth's rotation around the Sun, different parts of the Earth are closer to the Sun at different times throughout the year. I've captured a film. This is an image from a film that I posted on my website, a scientific film, a Western film, not an Arabic or Muslim one, that describes how the Earth's orbit around the Sun, when it's finished, it's cradle. It tilts like a cradle. Okay? The film then goes on to explain the scientific details of equinoxes and solstice and southern and northern latitudes. All that talks about that. Okay, I'm going to skip one more thing. Allah Almighty said that He created us. In the rebuttal section, hopefully I'm going to get a chance to do it. We were created from a penetrating or piercing, that God Almighty said in Noble verse chapter, I'll get to it. He said He created the male and the female from a piercing nutfa. Nutfa means sperm. And here's a picture. Sorry if it's graphic. I apologize. But here's, I'm sure you all know it. This is a female egg, and that's a piercing male sperm. God Almighty said that He created the male and the female. He specified it from a piercing, a stabbing, a poking. This is according to Lisan al-Arab dictionary. Sperm. And this is what we have. It is a piercing sperm. Okay? That's why we're mean, the men, Anyway. Okay, so thank you. I'll continue when I come back.
Okay. All right, now we will have Nabeel Qureshi's opening statement. You also have 30 minutes.
All right, just give me a moment for the screen to turn back on. Nice and purple, just like I intended. And when do we begin time? Good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to this debate here. As some of you know, I will be graduating from med school in a week, and I have a lot of you to thank for that because your prayers have helped bear me through, and I know I wouldn't have been able to get through this without your prayers. So thank you so much for that. And in 1 week, I'll have my MD, finally. So thanks for your prayers. Now we're going to turn to a topic of conversation that is extremely important. We're going to be talking about the Qur'an. The Qur'an plays an essential role in Islam. It has played an essential role since the very beginning of Islam. It marked the initial inception of the prophethood of Muhammad. Its contents define Sharia, and its recitation has been performed by billions of people over the past 1400 years. More importantly, it was Muhammad's central claim to prophethood. When asked for a sign indicating his truth, Muhammad would point to the Qur'an and say that his sign was the Qur'an. According to Abu Ahmad Yasir Ghazi, a contemporary Muslim scholar, he says the Qur'an has been put forth as a miracle that can never be limited in its style, prose, or content. And this summarizes the Muslim sentiment very well. Because you see, I used to be a Muslim. I myself believe these things. I used to recite the Qur'an over 19 times a day while reading Salat. By the age of 5, I had read and recited the entire Qur'an in Arabic. Now, I didn't know what the words meant, but simply reciting the Arabic words, to me, held holy power. I had soon memorized many of the last chapters of the Qur'an. When I was around 7 years old, my father had taken portions of the Qur'an, written them out by hand, and then posted them on the wall throughout my room, so that whenever I had some time to myself, I'd look around my room and I'd see verses of the Qur'an, and I'd sit there and read them and memorize them. My grandmother and my mom would come in, and they would sit me down and say, "This is how you properly recite the Qur'an. This is what these words mean." And gradually I memorized more and more of the Qur'an. As I grew older, I proclaimed these very words as miraculous, saying that they were infinite in meaning, infinite in nature, unchanging, unmatchable, miraculous in every single way, telling us insights into science, astronomy, and literary excellence. But I sit here before you now proclaiming, certainly the Qur'an is not miraculous, and it is certainly not the Word of God. Well, what happened? Why did I change my perspective so much? Well, the reason why is because instead of just listening to the folklore and tales that I'd been told about the Qur'an, I decided to actually investigate the historical evidence myself. I also examined the most popular claims from Muslims regarding the miraculous nature of the Qur'an, and I found them all to be entirely lacking in persuasive power. Well, since I'll be a doctor in a week, I figure it would be good to get some practice examining things the way a physician does. Now, whenever a new patient comes to a physician's office, either in the ER or in a clinic, the very first thing the physician does is he takes a history and physical examination. And the history will usually be comprised of such questions as, what was the trigger of your illness? And, what was the course? Were there any unusual symptoms? And then after asking these things, the physician then goes on to ask about, or to conduct a physical examination, check the person's body for any sort of signs that will lead them towards a solid diagnosis. Well, we can do that today. How about we talk about getting the history of the Qur'an by discussing how its revelation started, then talk about any unusual events that might have occurred, and follow up by talking about the course of the Qur'an. And after getting this history, we then move on to examining the body of evidence as Muslims provide their claims for the miraculous nature of the Qur'an. So, let's start with the history. And as my attending physicians always told me, an excellent history can lead you very close to the final diagnosis. So, let's see if I can make them proud today. We're starting from the very beginning. The very first revelation of the Qur'an is told to us through Sahih Bukhari, which is the most trustworthy book of Islam, other than the Qur'an. Sahih Bukhari, it says, "Suddenly the truth descended upon Muhammad while he was in the cave of Hira. The angel came to him in it and asked him to read. The Prophet replied, 'I do not know how to read.' The Prophet then added, 'The angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore. He then released me and asked me again to read, and I said, 'I do not know how to read.' Whereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it anymore. He then released me and asked me to read, and again I replied, 'I do not know how to read.' Thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me and then released me and said the first words of the Quran, 'Iqra bi ismi rabbika allazi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq.'" This is how the Quran started. So, at this point, we have to ask a simple question. Did this seem like a glorious, peaceful event? Absolutely not. It seems more like a frightening, violent event. This account said Muhammad was pressed so hard that he could not bear it anymore. Another account, that of Ibn Ishaq, says Muhammad was so tightly he thought it was death, and the only reason he cooperated with the spirit was so that he could be delivered. Now, I don't know about you, but if this were to happen to me, I'd be pretty frightened. Violent, forceful commands from an unknown spirit. Now, I've heard stories of divine inspiration, and this does not sound like it. If anything, it sounds demonic. In fact, this is what Muhammad himself thought. According to the earliest Muslim literature, Muhammad said, "Now none of God's creatures were more hateful to me than a poet or a man possessed. I could not even look at them. I thought, woe is me, a poet or a man possessed. I will go to the top of a mountain and throw myself down, that I may kill myself and gain rest." You heard that correctly. Muhammad, after receiving the initial revelation of the Qur'an, wanted to kill himself. This is found also in the most trustworthy book, Sahih Bukhari. It says he intended several times to throw himself off from the tops of high mountains. So according to the earliest and most trustworthy Muslim sources, Muhammad was violently overtaken by a spirit, received instruction, and as the spirit left him, he would panic, undergo a depression, and habitually attempt suicide. Now, we've barely gotten through the first part of the history, and already there's a red flag. These are not symptoms that were experienced by the past prophets. I mean, God spoke to Noah in Genesis 6. He spoke to Abraham in Genesis 12. He spoke to Moses in Exodus 3, talked to Isaiah in Isaiah 6, Mary in Luke 1, and Jesus in Mark 1. In none of these cases did any of the people receiving revelation panic, undergo depression or anxiety, or attempt suicide. Now, there is one person in the Bible who does fit a similar constellation of symptoms, and fits it exactly. That's Judas. Judas underwent the very same symptoms that Muhammad went. The same constellation of symptoms is consistent with one other person, that's Judas. But Judas, according to the Bible, was inspired by none other than Satan. John 13 and Acts 1. Is it possible, since there's consistent symptomatology, that both Judas and Muhammad were inspired by the same Satan? This leads to the next point in the history. Muhammad himself said that he had received revelations from Satan. According to approximately 37 ancient Muslim sources, the Quran had a revelation which, quote, Satan had cast on the tongue of the messenger of God. According to these accounts, Muhammad later repented for his grave error, and God forgave him for his mistake. But all the same, if Satan was able to put words into Muhammad's mouth, then what is there to say that the rest of the Quran is actually from God and not from Satan himself? There's little reason to think that. In contrast, there is a lot of reason to think that these revelations were not from God. Let us continue on with the history of the revelation of the Quran. As time went on, Muhammad received revelations that were in direct contradiction to his older revelation. A new revelation would come and it would contradict an old revelation from God. But this new revelation is said to abrogate the older one. Sometimes the abrogated text remained in the Quran, sometimes it didn't. But here's the point. Are these texts the Word of God, the eternal, everlasting Word of God? If they're in 1 second they're in the Quran, the next second they're not. No, of course not. They're not eternal, far from it. They were certainly fleeting, ephemeral. Put another way, the symptom of abrogation is more consistent with what we'd call a work in progress, not the eternal Word of God. The next pertinent point in the history of the Quran's record is the concept of ahruf. Now, I could try to explain it to you myself, but this symptom is quite perplexing. Allow me to quote Sahih Bukhari. The Khalifa Umar said, the Khalifa being after Muhammad died, a man named Umar became the Khalifa at this time, though Umar was still alive. He said, I heard Hisham reciting Surat al-Furqan in a way different to that of mine. So I tied his garment round his neck and seized him by it and brought him to Allah's apostle and said, I have heard him reciting Surat al-Furqan in a way different to the way you taught it to me. The Prophet ordered me to release him and asked Hisham to recite it. When he recited it, Allah's apostle said, it was revealed in this way. He then asked me to recite it. When I recited it, he said, it was revealed in this way. The Quran has been revealed in 7 ahruf, so recite it in the way that is easier for you. So what we have here is that the Quran is said to have been revealed in 7 different modes of revelation. What in the world is this about? What we do know is that we can't just say this is different types of accents or different types of dialects. Because we see here from Abu Dawood, this is regarding one example of the ahruf, each mode is sufficiently health-giving, whether you utter the words all-hearing and all-knowing, or instead all-powerful and all-wise. What is being said here? You can say either all-hearing and all-knowing or all-powerful, all-wise. It's all the same thing. So it's not just a dialectical difference, it's a difference in wording. This is perplexing indeed. It's so perplexing, in fact, that generations of Muslim scholars were entirely unable to grapple with it. One ancient scholar, As-Suyuti, listed over 40 different definitions of the word ahruf. Another scholar, Ibn Sadan, he was a grammarian and reciter of the Quran, declared that the true meaning of the ahruf can only be known to God. One contemporary scholar, Abu Amr Yasir says, the reason that such a great difference of opinion exists concerning the exact meaning of the ahruf is due to the fact that there does not exist any explicit narration from the Prophet Muhammad or the Salaf concerning the exact nature of the ahruf. So what does this all mean for our purposes? It means that, number one, the Quran has an escape clause for any of its mistakes and variants. Up to 7 different sets of variants can be found for a single verse, and a Muslim can just say, oh, it's a different ahruf, to try to say that the Quran is still perfectly preserved. This is awfully suspicious of what we would call a cover-up. Number 2, it makes the Quran appear to be of human origin for yet another reason. So as my attendings would say when I'm taking too long taking a history, how about we wrap it up? The last point I would like to bring up about the history of the Quran is a brief account of its collection. Between the time of Muhammad and Uthman was when the Quran was collected. During Muhammad's lifetime himself, there was no collection of the Quran. Shortly after Muhammad's death, there were a series of battles fought between Muslims and people who wanted to leave Islam now that Muhammad was dead. During those apostate wars, Abu Bakr, the next person who was in charge after Muhammad, sent out warriors who knew the Quran very well, thinking that God would preserve their lives. Well, hundreds of those warriors died in battle, and then Abu Bakr got concerned. So he called Zayd ibn Thabit, one of Muhammad's scribes, to collect the Quran into one book. Now Zayd, when he's told, hey Zayd, you need to collect the Quran, Zayd's response was, if they ordered me to shift one of the mountains, it would not have been heavier for me than ordering me to collect the Quran. Moving a mountain is easier than collecting the Quran, is what he said. Anyway, he went ahead and collected the book and he put it away. That book that was collected, that first Quranic book, was never copied, it was never published, it was never sanctioned as the official book of Islam. 18 years later, people were reciting the Quran and they came up to Uthman and said, Uthman, we're reciting the Quran differently from one another, save your nation. Uthman then asked for the Quran to be brought back to him, and he brought the same scribe, Zayd, to come back, and he ordered Zayd and 3 other men to revise the Quran and make copies. After this was done, Uthman ordered all existing manuscripts and fragments of the Quran, get this, to be destroyed by fire. Every single evidence of the Quran was destroyed. All that was left were the copies that he made. Now, there are many telling things about this point in the history, such as Zayd's reaction to having to collect the Quran, the multiple revisions of the Quran, and finally the burning of the manuscripts. Suffice it to say, these symptoms are again inconsistent with the concept of a miraculous book, and much more consistent with a human process. However, there's much more to say about this, and we'll return to this point in the end of our account. So that's what you would call a focused or pertinent history. At this point in a patient encounter, a physician would usually go back and think about the things he's learned from the history before moving on. What we've seen so far is, number 1, the revelation of the Quran was violent, it was frightening, it caused depression, anxiety, and recurrent suicide attempts. This symptomatology was then heightened by satanic revelations, by abrogation, by ahruf, the escape clause, and also by the sketchy collection of the Quran. After just half of this patient encounter, the condition of this patient does not seem to be miraculous. Far from it, it appears malignant. Let's move on to the examination of the miracle claims of the Quran. Now, in order to defend the miracle claims of the Quran, Muslims use many arguments. In my experience, the 4 most common arguments are the arguments from literary excellence, mathematical marvels, scientific accuracy, which was the crux of the argument today, and also perfect preservation. We'll go ahead and take it from the top. The argument from literary excellence. It is one of the few arguments the Quran actually provides for its own miraculous nature. In 5 separate verses, the Quran issues a challenge to anyone who thinks that the Quran is not from God, i.e. us, non-Muslims, to try to create a book like it, or to create a chapter like it. In other words, imitate the Quran to whatever degree, depending on the individual challenge. The Quran says that when disbelievers attempt to write something like the Quran, they will realize how miraculous the Quran is in its literary excellence, and they will just desist from it and realize that they were mistaken. Well, there are many problems with this argument from literary excellence. First, it is non sequitur. It doesn't logically follow. Just because something is excellent in literary quality, it does not mean it is from a divine origin. Second, we have consistent application of this criteria. If Da Vinci or Shakespeare or Mozart said, hey, make a painting like mine, or write a play like mine, or make music like mine, otherwise you have to admit I'm from God, no one would believe them. We wouldn't say that they're of divine origin. Certainly no Muslim would. So the Muslim who provides this argument is necessarily inconsistent in their application of criteria. Third, and get this test is for the non-believers. It is telling non-believers to just try and write something like the Quran and see what happens. They themselves, the non-believers, are the judges, and they themselves are supposed to realize that they cannot match the Quran. So I should not be able to say that there is anything that rivals the Quran. But I can tell you right here and now, there's plenty that rivals the Quran. Psalm 23 comes to mind. The Qur'an Miraculous comes to mind. In fact, the entire Bible comes to mind. The problem here is, though, is not, hey, Muslim, go compare what I just said to the Quran. No, I'm the one who's doing the comparison. I'm the judge. I should not have been able to just say what I said if the challenge of the Quran is true. Finally, and most poignantly, the Quran has been disproven on this point over and over and over again. First by Al-Nadir, who was a man in Muhammad's time who used to hear revelations of the Quran and say, hey, I can write something better than that. That by itself breaks the challenge. Second, by a man named Abdullah ibn Sa'd, who was one of Muhammad's scribes, and he would add or substitute his own words into the Quran whenever Muhammad was receiving revelations. And Muhammad would hear those things, and he would say, okay, your words are just as good. Third, by Ali Dashti, the famous contemporary grammarian, who said, the Quran contains sentences which are incomplete and not fully intelligible without the aid of commentaries. Aberrations in the language have given scope to critics who deny the Quran's eloquence. And fourth, by a book called The True Furqan. Now this book is a modern book that has been issued specifically to answer the challenge of literary excellence. It was written in the style of the Quran, and it is often confused for the Quran. That's how similar it is. In fact, Muslims often confuse the True Furqan for the Quran. So we have no less than 4 reasons to reject the argument from literary excellence, including logical fallacy and also proven failure of the fallacious challenge. By the way, this one fact is enough to disprove the miraculous nature of the Quran. But we have many more reasons. Let's go on to the rest of our examination today. We're now going to talk about the mathematical marvels. Now, I've seen many claims for mathematical marvels online. My debate opponent today, Osama Abdullah, has posted on our website. I don't know what these numbers mean, but I do know that such amazing accuracy is abnormal. And it could not have been done by a human, especially 1400 years ago. So the claim here is that there are such cool numerical patterns in the Quran that it must be from God. Well, let me tell you, the first thing that should already be obvious to all of us is that it doesn't matter how many cool numerical patterns there are in a book, it certainly doesn't necessarily mean it's from God. It's non sequitur. Beyond that, extensive numerical patterns are commonplace. For example, the Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven has been analyzed. Just the first 2 sentences were analyzed. And the number 7 was found many, many times in just the first 2 verses. Another example you can find online, I think this is hilarious. There was a moderator of a listserv, and she just had her signature. It just had her name and her position as the moderator. And that one 2-line signature was analyzed, and it was found the number 19 appeared over 74 times in that signature. Well, according to most of the arguments that people provide for numerical excellence, or mathematical marvels, this would mean that her signature had to be inspired from God. But we haven't broached that issue today, so let's not waste too much time talking about that. Unless he brings it up in the rebuttal, then I'll bring it up again. Let's move on to the argument from scientific accuracy, which is where he mostly focused today. The first thing I want to mention about that is a quotation by one Muslim. He says, "The Quran was revealed 14 centuries ago, mentioned facts only recently discovered or proven by scientists. This proves without doubt that the Quran must be the literal word of God, and that the Quran was not authored by by Muhammad or by any other human being." I must say this. This is the first of the main arguments that Muslims use that even begins to approach not being non sequitur. So, props for that. Unfortunately, the alleged scientific insights generally do not exist. They can usually be sorted into one of three categories. The first being, let's see if I put these up here, taken out of context. You start looking at these scientifically miraculous insights and you realize that they're just statements that have been taken out of context. Number two, some of them are just blatantly inaccurate. And number three, you have some statements that are touted as being scientific insight that were actually obvious fact at the time of Muhammad's life. Osama has provided many of, all of his statements fall into one of these three. We'll deal with a lot of them during the rebuttals. Right now I'd like to focus on the blatantly inaccurate, however. Here's one of those statements. This is a statement on astronomy from the Quran. It talks about stars. We actually have many statements about stars in the Quran, 4 of them. But this one, essentially what it's saying here is that stars are used to decorate the lower heavens. And then they're also used as a guard against jinn or demons. And if a jinn or a demon tries to steal something from heaven, it will be chased by a flaming fire. In other words, the star will pursue that demon. Let's think about it here for a moment. It certainly seems that the author of the Quran has confused stars in heavens with meteors traversing the Earth's atmosphere. Stars don't pursue things in space. The meteors come through the atmosphere and it looks like they might be pursuing something. So what you have here is the author of the Quran has confused meteors with stars. Does this sound like a book with amazing scientific insight? Hardly. Moving on, I haven't said anything medical in a while. Don't think I forgot. The Quran deals with embryology in many places. Although believing any of the verses that deal with embryology probably would have gotten me kicked out of first year embryology, there's one in particular that would have probably gotten me kicked out of med school entirely. It's this one here. Now let man but think from what he has created. He is created from a drop emitted, proceeding from between the backbone and the ribs. So what's being said here? The fluid that produces a baby, in other words semen, is emitted from between a man's backbone and his ribs. Now I hope your parents have had this talk with you, because we're about to get a little bit technical. Semen issues forth from here. You have the seminal vesicle here, you got the testes down here, and you got the bulbourethral gland right there, and they travel through the vas deferens and out of there. This, if you notice, this all here is at the most inferior region of the spine. This back here is the sacrum, the bottommost part of the spine, and it is not near the ribs. Now, here are the ribs. These are what you call ribs. And here is the pelvis. So we got ribs, backbone, pelvis. Pelvis, ribs, backbone. Note the pelvis is not between the ribs and the backbone. This argument doesn't have a prayer unless it looks like this. Moving on. That's the argument from scientific accuracy. As you can tell, there's statements that are blatantly inaccurate. Now, before trying to interpret accurate statements, you would have to weigh them against the inaccurate statements, which we will go on to do, I'm sure, in the rebuttal section. But now we're going to talk about the argument for perfect preservation. How much time do I have left? 6 minutes. If you take any longer, it'll be 5 minutes. Okay. So what we have here is a statement in the Quran that we have, without doubt, sent down the message, and we will assuredly guard it from corruption. What is being said? It's being said that the Quran here is being guarded by God, and He will not allow it to be corrupted. About this, Abdullah Andalusi has said, none can have any doubt whatsoever regarding the Quran's authenticity and immunity and purity from any and every kind of addition or omission or alteration. For there is nothing so authentic in the whole human history as this fact about the Quran, that it is the same Quran that was presented by the Holy Prophet to the world. It cannot be overemphasized how important the perfect preservation of the Quran is to Muslims. It makes the foundation of their faith. However, we find that early Islamic sources say other things. According to Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of the second Khalifa, let none of you say that he has acquired the entire Quran. For how does he know what it all is? Much of the Quran has been lost. Thus let him say, I have acquired of it only what is available. Ibn Abi Dawood, son of Abu Dawood, said, many of the passages of the Quran that were sent down were known only by those who died on the day of Yamama. They were not known by those who survived them, nor were they written down, nor had Abu Bakr, Umar, or Uthman collected the Quran by this time, and nor were they found with even one person after them. These are explicit statements by early Muslims that parts of the Quran have been irretrievably lost. Beyond this, there was extreme controversy regarding the contents of what should go in the Quran. According to Sahih Bukhari, Muhammad had handpicked 4 top teachers of the Quran, and the first one he named was Abdullah ibn Masud. Recall that Abdullah ibn Masud was not the one to collect the Quran after Muhammad died, it was somebody else, Zayd ibn Thabit. So when Abdullah ibn Masud, Muhammad's top teacher of the Quran, got a hold of what Zayd had produced, he said this: "The people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran. I like it better to read according to the recitation of him, the Prophet, whom I love more than that of Zayd ibn Thabit." What a bold statement. Zayd's Quran, a deception? The modern Quran today, Muhammad's top teacher is calling it a deception. Now, why would Muhammad's chosen teacher of the Quran call the modern Quran a deception? It turns out that Masud's Quran was very different from Zayd's. It had different words, different verses, and even different chapters. 111 chapters versus Zayd's 114. When Uthman demanded Masud's Quran to be confiscated and burnt, remember that, Uthman went and said, "Get all the manuscripts and burn them." Ibn Masud did not give it up. In fact, he called all the Muslims in his area to not give up their codices in order to protect them, and Allah would reward them in the day of resurrection for their protecting the Quran. That's what Abdullah ibn Masud said. Ultimately, he did have to give it up, though. Now, it could be said that we have one loony here. We have Abdullah, even though Muhammad chose this loony, we could say we have one loony. But that's not the case. One of the other 4 top teachers that Muhammad chose, his name was Ubay ibn Ka'b. He was also known as the best reciter of the Quran. Now, Ubay's Quran also differed from Zayd's. It had 116 chapters, 2 of which you cannot find in today's Quran. It also had different verses, some of which Masud had in his Quran, and Zayd does not have, and we do not have them today. Umar, the Khalifa, the second Khalifa, is recorded as having said that the Quran was missing the verse of stoning. He was so emphatic about this that he stated he wished he could write it into the Quran himself. In fact, Ubay agreed with Umar that this verse should be a part of the Quran. He included it in his codex, and so did another man, Abu Musa. A bunch of people are agreeing about this verse needing to be in the Quran, yet it is not found in today's Quran. Aisha, the wife of Muhammad, is noted as having said that Surah 33 used to be hundreds of verses longer, and we find agreement with her as well. Ubay agreed with her, and many of those verses are said to contain the ones that other people were looking for. Aisha was even noted to correct a verse of the Quran, swearing that she heard her correction from Muhammad himself. In addition, if we were to ask Aisha what happened to the verse of stoning and the verse of suckling, she might say, "My goat ate it." Indeed, it is true. According to Sunan Ibn Majah, it is said that she kept verses under a cart. Meanwhile, the Holy Prophet died, and we became busy with his funeral. And in that time, a goat came in and ate the verses. The last 2 verses of Surah 9 as well are held in controversy. It is said that only one person had those verses of the Quran when they were copied into Uthman's codex. Yet one of the rules for copying verses was that they had to be present with at least 2 people. So we know people today actually who say the Quran shouldn't have those verses and they take them out of the Quran. So to recap, early Muslim statements said that the Quran had been irretrievably lost. 2 of Muhammad's top 4 teachers of the Quran disagree with today's Quran. Multiple early Muslims believe that verses are missing, possibly hundreds of verses, and multiple sources indicate that a goat ate large portions of the Quran. There simply is no indication the Quran is perfectly preserved, and every indication that it is not. So when we conducted our history, we determined that the Quran did not seem miraculous. Our examination of the body of evidence confirms this diagnosis. The literary challenge presented by the Quran is fallacious and failed anyway. The mathematical marvels are also fallacious and would make all sorts of things divinely inspired. The scientific accuracies are not at all accurate, and we'll be discussing those, I'm sure, in the rebuttal section. And the text of the Quran has been uniformly corrupted to the point of no return, since all our evidence was burnt by Uthman. It seems that the prognosis for the claim that the Quran is miraculous is grim. Both the history and the examination indicate nothing but a pathological process and not a miraculous one. Well, let us see in the rebuttal section if Usama can resuscitate his arguments.
Thank you, Nabeel. I'd like to congratulate you for your MD degree. Wish you all the best and hope you succeed and graduate.
Thank you.
Moving on, you mentioned several points. I'd like to first mention that the reason why we have Sahih, which means authentic in Arabic, books today is because the sources that my respected opponent here quoted had been disputed for a long, long time. Exactly, and even, your Bible sources are even worse actually, but think of them as the Gnostic sources of the Bible, the rejected Gospels, like the Gospel of Philip that says Jesus kissed Mary Magdalene in the mouth. These kind of Gospels are rejected by you guys. Well, we had similar also books, and of course, my respected opponent, that's his best source because that's all he has. That's the stories that he narrated to you. They don't exist in our Sahih books. And there are 40 books from Al-Tabari, which this is where they get all their stuff from. There are 40 books of these collections. I only brought a few of them. They contain hundreds, literally hundreds, of quotations that are similar to the ones that I'm about to read to you, so that you would know what I'm talking about. Here from this book, so the History of Al-Tabari, Volume 1, General Introduction, from the creation. Anyway, I'm not going to cite all the books, but here's on page 170. This book of mine may be found to contain some information mentioned by us on the authority of certain men of the past, which the reader may disapprove of, and the listener may find this detestable, because he can find nothing sound and no real meaning in it. In such cases, he should know that it is not our fault that such information comes to him, but the fault of someone who transmitted it to us. We have merely reported it as it was reported to us. Okay, so he did not double check anything. He basically took anything and everything that was told to him from the enemies of Islam and also the real Muslims, and he put it there, and he equated all of them as equal and in value. That's wrong. Okay, so if you're gonna do that, well, you might as well accept the Gospel of Philip then, and Jesus kissed Mary Magdalene on the mouth. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. Okay. Here's another quote. Al-Tabari account. Here, the translator, says on the Al-Tabari's account of this period is derived mainly from Ibn Ishaq, Sirah, one of the main sources for the subject. The original version of the Sirah, which was transmitted through several riwayat, did not survive. Okay? And here, Al-Waqidi, one of the biggest narrators he reports. Al-Waqidi is another authority very frequently quoted by Al-Tabari. And here, what do we find on Mr. Al-Waqidi? Let's see here. Again, there are hundreds of quotations in these books alone, and also maybe thousands in the 40 books in these collections. I did not want to bring all of them because of time constraint. Tabari does not present us with a unified narrative. His text is complex mosaic of verbatim citations from older sources, most of them compiled in the late 2nd/8th and early 3rd/9th centuries. Okay? And here he says, I'm persuaded that we cannot accept these texts as direct and authentic accounts of the events themselves. This is the translator saying this on Al-Tabari. Tabari narratives are mere invention. No, I do not mean that Tabari's narratives are mere inventions. Clearly, they are not. They are in some may rooted in real things that happened to real people. On the other hand, it is not at all clear that we can penetrate to the core of the fact and lay behind these stories. For the events, here the example for the events in Iraq. Here, Al-Tabari relies on chiefly on Muhammad bin Umar al-Waqidi and mysteries of Saif bin Umar. I think he quoted him here. I believe. I'm not sure. Anyway, both of these authorities raise real problems. Okay, Al-Waqidi here, in addition, he displays a detectable bias Though that in itself should not disqualify his testimony. In any case, medieval Muslims, commentators, did not regard him as wholly reliable. Perhaps they had better reason for this than we sometimes think. I mean, I do not try to be, again, I'm not going to quote the rest of them here for the sake of time, but I mean, you get the picture here. I mean, if you're gonna treat us like this, might as well treat yourself like this too, okay? If you're gonna dish it out, you might as well take it, okay? Why don't you accept the text that you reject, okay? Anyway, as to Muhammad had an evil event and it sounds demonic and all that, the guy's personality, okay, was different than anyone else. And who told you your Bible's accounts are reliable anyway? I mean, here from the Bible, since it doesn't exist in the Bible that one prophet was terrified because the angel came to him. Well, it's not like every day you receive an angel telling you that you're a prophet, okay? So the guy was an illiterate Bedouin, okay, and a goat herder, okay, a shepherd. I mean, he was a simple man, okay, and there he is. He was chosen to be a prophet, and the Holy Quran, unlike the Bible, is truly miraculous. And I wish I had the time to prove it, more time to prove it. But anyway, I mean, this is all a matter of opinion for him. And as to Muhammad wanted to kill himself, he never did, okay. He was confused. He thought it was Satan or a demon that came upon him. But then Angel Gabriel came to him and assured him, okay, and reassured him that yes, it is real, and you are a true prophet. This is not Satan talking to you, and you're not demon possessed, okay? So, and the prophet calmed down and did not want to kill himself after that. So what's the big deal, okay? Well, that shows you the desperation. Muhammad received the revelations from Satan. That is a lie. Okay, that is a true lie. It's been disputed many, many times, and I just find it hilarious because since you want to go that route, sir, why don't you then tell us about the prophets in your Old Testament that let's see, that bowed to idols. Okay, let's see. Okay, here's one for you, Mr. Nabeel. If I could find it. Let's see. Here we go. King Solomon, what is it? King Solomon in the book of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. And also 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. You read his story here in 2 Chronicles chapters 1 through 9, and 2 Kings chapters 2 through 10. You read about King Solomon bowing to idols, literally. Okay, I mean, does this make his proverbs and his books false? I don't know. According to Mr. Nabeel, yeah, they do, right? Which makes your Bible false, right? And what do you say of the accounts, the contradictions in your Bible? 2 Samuel chapter 10 verse 18, it says, talks about David slew 700 chariots and 40,000 horsemen, where in 1 Chronicle chapter 19 verse 18 talks about David slew 7,000 chariots and 40,000 footmen. And here, let's see. And in 1 Kings chapter 16 verses 6 through 8, it says 26th year of reign for Asa. Okay, and here in 2nd Chronicle chapter 16 verse 1, it says 36 years. Okay, so well, which was it, 26 or 36? I mean, how old was Ahaziah? Okay, when he began to reign? In 2nd book of Kings, chapter 8, verse 26, he was 22. In 2nd book of Chronicle, chapter 22, verse 2, he was 42. So was he 22 or 42? Okay. So moving on. As to abrogations of the Holy Quran, that's nothing new in your Bible. I mean, Abraham was Sarah's half brother. Okay, she was his sister from his father, okay? So before the Mosaic law, okay, brothers and sisters were allowed to get married. before Moses became a prophet, brothers and sisters, according to Yahweh Almighty, Jehovah, were allowed to get married. Moses' law abrogated that. In the Mosaic law itself, the law of inheritance doesn't allow the daughter to inherit when the son is present. If I'm a son and I have two sisters, I'm the only one who inherits, according to Judaism. Well, Prophet Job broke that. His daughters and his sons inherited. Divorce was allowed in the Old Testament, and polygamy was allowed in the Old Testament. Divorce is not allowed in the New Testament, and believe me, polygamy is allowed in the New Testament, but to you guys it's not. So here's an abrogation for you, right? So what's the big deal? I mean, what is the problem here? Can a man marry his brother's wife? In the Mosaic law itself, there's an abrogation on that. One verse says no, and the other verse says yes. You know, so okay. One verse says no, and then another verse says if your brother divorces her, then you're not allowed to marry her. But if your brother dies, okay, and she's still his wife, you are obligated to marry her. Okay. That's an obligation. I mean, she's the same person, and he's the same person, your brother and your sister-in-law. So why are you allowed to marry her in this situation and not allowed to marry her in this situation? So this is, shows you how desperate my opponent is. The Quran is revealed in 7 Ahrus dialects. That's not accurate. The Quran was revealed in the Qurayshi dialect and was written in the Qurayshi dialect, in Mecca. Okay, dialect. That's Arabia as a whole, which is about 1/3 of the United States in size, had 7 dialects, 7 different dialects of Arabic. Like here you have Texas dialect of English and New York dialect, something like that. Okay, same thing in Arabia. And the dialects were not a problem. The Quran was narrated and written in the Qurayshi dialect in Mecca. Abrogations, I discovered that. As to Judas, similar to Muhammad. Yeah, okay. And by the way, according to the Gospel of Judas that was recently discovered, Judas was not did not betray Jesus. And in my next debate with Mr. David Wood, I will go deeper, very deep into the contradictions of the Bible and the contradictions in the crucifixion story. Paul said that Jesus appeared to 12 disciples after he was crucified. While that's not true, because if Judas committed suicide, then there was only 11. Okay, so Paul was a liar. Okay, on that. Okay, or the Gospels are wrong, and Paul was right, because according to the latest Gospel of Judas that was discovered, Judas did not betray Jesus. He was one of the disciples and remained one of the disciples. So maybe he did remain alive, okay, and did not hang himself and kill himself before Jesus got crucified. I'll let you sort that out, okay? But I'll explain that in much more details with Mr. David Wood, our other respected debater. Letter of excellence. The point of letter of excellence, the words are Arabic, okay? The grammar and the stylistic style of the holy words of the Holy Quran are very, very complicated, very complex. They're not easy to reproduce. But the noble verse, you missed the entire point. The noble verse is talking about the spirit that exists in the holy book. When Allah Almighty challenged all of mankind to produce a Quran like it, yes, and no one was able to, because any book that was produced, it was man-made. It's a lie. It's empty. Okay? That's why it's like the Gospels that you have. They're always in dispute, always in speculation, always you have to rely on mistranslations, and you can't even define what Jesus is. You believe in Trinity. The word itself, Trinity, does not even exist in the entire Bible. Things like that. You're always in speculation. You don't have the truth. God Almighty was talking about this. Okay, the Quran is the truth. The spirit of the Holy Quran puts peace in you and puts fear of Allah Almighty in you. That's the miracle of the Quran. plus the scientific miracles that I got into. And by the way, speaking of, and as to the compilation of the Quran and all the narrations that he got from these sources here, about the Quran is partial, that there is more verses that should have been included, that's a lie. Okay? These are lies that were invented on the mouths of the companions that he quoted. So the companions did not say that. These are lies that were invented on their mouths 200 years after they died, or 150 years after they died. But the Quran was first compiled. First of all, the Quran was written down during Prophet Muhammad's times, and then it was compiled during Abu Bakr's times, the first caliph, and finalized during Uthman's time, the third Islamic caliph. And there were 70 Quranic scholars that went through the painstaking task to compile the entire Noble Quran. And here are a few numerical miracles that will testify for this. The Noble Quran, here's an odd numerical miracle. How many minutes do I have, sir? 2 minutes, okay. Odd okay, first of all, I'll get into the iron number. No, I'll get into the odd and even numerical miracle. There are 114 noble verses, noble chapters in the Holy Quran. If you add 1 plus 2 plus 3, all the way to 114, you'll get 6,555. If you add all the noble verses in the Quran, the total sum of the verses of the Quran is 6,236 verses. Okay, with me so far? So the sum of the chapters is 6,555, and the sum of the verses is 6,236. Now if you add each chapter, the number of the chapter, number 1, with a total of its verses, so first chapter plus 7 verses equals 8. If you add these chapters, with each chapter with the total number of its verses, you get a list of numbers. The total number of the odd results is 6,555, and I showed him the Excel spreadsheet. I was amazed by it. This is the quote that he quoted me on, that's saying, I'm blown away by this, okay, when it was discovered. I didn't discover it, but it was discovered. And I went through it. I went through every single one of these verses to make sure that it's not a lie. And if you take the sum of the even results, it'll come up to 6,236, okay? So that testifies right there to the perfect preservation of the Quran, because if one verse is extra, the whole miracle is gone. This miracle would not be right. It wouldn't add up, because the summation would be off. As to the iron, the chapter is 56, number 57. Okay, iron is in the center of the earth, and so is the noble chapter, which is called iron, and the noble verse that said, Allah Almighty said in the Quran, we sent down iron to earth. Okay, and scientists have proven that our solar system does not create iron. Iron came from other galaxies and hit Earth and penetrated Earth and stayed in the center of the Earth. The atom number, the chemistry atom number of iron is 26 or 27. 26. And the number the number of this verse that Allah Almighty sent iron is also 26. So there you have it. Thank you very much.
All right, so tell me when I start. Well, Osama had a lot of stuff in his opening statement. I wasn't able to talk about much about it in my opening statement, so let's briefly do that, and then we'll go and see what Osama talked about regarding what I had said. First and foremost, Osama's entire opening statement had to do with scientific miracles. He didn't focus on any of the other miracles. He then later brought some in, such as mathematical marvels. He's talked about that during his rebuttal, but during his opening statement, he focused entirely on scientific miracles. Now, if you'll recall, I said that you could divide up scientific miracles, or the alleged scientific miracle claims, into 3 different sections. The first being statements that were taken out of context, the second being statements that are blatantly inaccurate, and the third are statements that are just plain obvious. I have to say, Osama, your first one that you brought about Hubuk, I did not get the verse for that. I didn't get the reference for that, so I wasn't able to look into that. The rest of those we'll address now. First, he talked about how the Quran involves statements regarding rosy galaxies in the Earth. When the Earth explodes, he says, we'll see something similar to that. This is not a miraculous statement for reasons. First and foremost, it is not taken in context. The context refers to God's future judgment of the world. This statement itself does not have to do with galaxies. It does not have to do with anything in the stars. It has to do with the future judgment of the world. And he says when the universe explodes, it will look like a nebula. Well, nebulas are within the universe. You can't say that when the universe explodes, it's going to look like a nebula. A nebula is something in the system of the universe. And when the universe explodes, who knows what it's going to look like? And in fact, we don't even know if the universe is going to explode. Scientists aren't agreed on that. So all these statements cause that statement to be inaccurate. Then he referred to the verse 41, chapter 41, verse 11. He says, God says the heavens will be turned to smoke, or the heavens were smoke. First off, this verse is just blatantly inaccurate. If you look at the actual context of the verse, it's talking about what the state of the world was when it was created. He said, in his design, it had been smoke, and he said to it into the earth, come together, willingly or unwillingly. Then he said, he completed them as 7 firmaments in 2 days, and he assigned to each heaven in its duty and command, and we adorned the lower heaven with lights and with guard, such as the decree of him. So basically what it is saying is that when he created the world, he made 7 heavens. And in the lowest of heavens are all the stars that we have, and then there's a heaven above that, and a heaven above that. This is not scientifically accurate in any way whatsoever. The stars are out in the universe. They aren't in any one heaven, which then has more heavens above it. There's no way you can defend that within the context. He then refers to verses 21 and verse 50, chapter 21 and chapter 51, saying that the universe is expanding. These are both taken out of context. If you actually read one of the verses, it says that the vast, instead of saying that the universe is vast, it's talking about the power of God being vast. And then the next verse says the earth is expanding. So if anything is expanding in chapter 51, verse 47, it's the earth, not the universe. And so Osama's statement is incorrect yet again. He then referred to chapter 21, verse 104, saying that how could the Quran have known that the universe is going to roll up like a scroll? Scientists know that today. Well, I say all that anyone would have had to do in that time is open up Revelation chapter 6, verse 14, where it says the heavens would be rolled up like a scroll. So even if you didn't have to know, all you had to do was have access to Revelation chapter 6, and you'd be able to say that regardless, even if you said Muhammad did not have access to Revelations, then you have to say that whoever did write Revelations was divinely inspired, and your argument would therefore fall on the basis of inconsistent application. Then you said chapter 18, verse 8 says the world will dry up and everything on it will be gone. This is not a scientifically miraculous statement. It's just a statement about end times, what may or may not happen. And just to say that the world will dry up isn't really something that's hard to say. It doesn't require deep insight. It could just be a statement of God saying we made the world and then we're going to bring things back to us. Chapter 15, verse 22, he talked about the fecundating winds, saying how the winds are the ones that fertilize the clouds to drop water. Well, I say that all you have to do in the desert, first off, you really probably pay attention to the clouds because you want water as much as possible. So these people are probably observing the clouds very carefully and then noticing that the winds bring the clouds, and when the clouds coalesce, then rain falls. That doesn't require any sort of miraculous insight. It's blatantly obvious that winds bringing things together will cause the rain to fall. Again, so this falls into the context of blatantly obvious. This next one is one of my favorites of Osama's. I could not stop thinking about it just because to me it was so mind-boggling how anyone could say anything like this. Chapter 6, verse 39 is talking about the S-shaped orbit of the moon according to Osama. Now, what's actually being said in this statement is that the sun will run its course until its appointed time, and then the moon will wane essentially until it looks like a fig branch or a date branch as he calls it, and nowhere at all is it saying anything about an orbit, much less than that. It is just talking about the course of the moon. According to Yusuf Ali, who is a translator of the Quran, and therefore to me is a more appropriate person to turn to when it comes to the translation of the Quran. According to Yusuf Ali, he says that when it becomes old, this is a part of a date palm, it becomes yellow, dry, and withered, and curves up like a sickle. Hence the comparison that the sickle-like appearance of the new moon is like this date palm. Basically what Yusuf Ali is saying is that as this statement is talking about how the moon looks like a dried up date palm. That's all that this verse is saying, even according to this commentator here and this translator. Osama chooses to read into it a statement of the miraculous orbit of the moon being known by the Quran. Now if you read things into the Quran, feel free, but don't say that it's a sign of miraculous accuracy. He then says the moon reflects the sun's light. This is pretty much obvious. People can look at the moon and say it's reflecting the sun's light. People have known that for a long time, from the time of Aristotle, which is 300 years BC, 900 years before Muhammad. People knew that the moon reflected the sun's light. Also, by the way, the verse doesn't say that. The verse says that the sun is a lamp and the moon is a light. It doesn't say that the moon is reflecting the sun's light. You can read that into it, but again, if you're just going to read into things, you can do all sorts of things here. And we see that that is happening. Chapter 54, verse 1, Osama says that the moon was cracked, and NASA has proved this. No, NASA has never said that the entire moon was cracked in half. Yes, you have cracks along the surface of the moon, and maybe it goes along the circumference, but the moon was never split in half, as Muslims say that Muhammad did as a miracle. So that is just inaccurate as well, and out of context. Chapter 79, verse 30, he says the earth is moving in space. Again, this is one of those statements where it had been known. People already knew that the earth had an orbit well before Muhammad's time, but regardless, read the verse itself, and I'd ask you, please, to make your statement in context of the verse itself. It doesn't say anything about the earth moving in space. It's talking about, well, you know what? In fact, I don't think you explicitly said what your argument was. So if you want to go back and revisit that, we could address that in the second rebuttal. But whatever your argument was, it wasn't saying that when I was reading along with you. Then you talked about seasons and orbits in chapter 20, verse 53 of the Quran. This was taken out of context again. The verse in chapter 20, verse 53 said nothing about seasons or orbits. What it was talking about was the earth being flat like a bed. Far from being scientifically accurate, I think that's scientifically inaccurate. The earth is not flat like a bed, it is round. So again, you're pointing to a verse that's not accurate, it's inaccurate. And finally, you brought up the hadith on sperm. I'm sorry, the Quranic verse on sperm. I would love to see what it was. You didn't tell us what that verse number was. I do want to see that, and I would love to talk about that. Time I have left.
You have 6 minutes.
All right, so then in my opening statement, I talked about the collection of the Quran. I talked about the history, talking about its first revelation, then going on to talk about its course, the usual symptoms, and then talking about the miracle claims. So let's talk about that. First and foremost, when Osama was talking about the story of Muhammad, he said Muhammad's reaction is understandable. An angel came to him, he was scared, and he said, this guy's personality is vastly different from everyone else's. Well, I would have to agree with that. His personality was vastly different from other people, but the Quran doesn't agree with that. The Quran says that Muhammad received messages just like every other prophet received messages. That's a verse from the Quran, but that is not what happened at all. No other prophet received messages like this. Osama then goes on to say that he was a shepherd. It's a very different mentality because he was a shepherd. Moses was a shepherd. Jesus was a shepherd. A lot of these people in the Bible were shepherds when they received inspiration. They did not become repetitively suicidal. They did not become anxious or depressed. So you have a man who had all sorts of similarities to these Old Testament prophets, nothing like them in actuality. In fact, more like Judas. He then talks about the Bible is worse. I do want to say something here. The Quran, as we have seen in chapter 15, verse 9 of the Quran, the statement is made that the Quran is perfectly preserved, that it has been guarded. And therefore, if we can show that the Quran has not been perfectly preserved, we know that the Quran is wrong when it says that it has been. The Bible, now when you turn to the Bible and you say, why is Christianity true? The arguments that we use are not, scientific accuracy, or, textual preservation. Those are not the arguments that are used for the truth of Christianity. The arguments that are used for the truth of Christianity is that Jesus died on the cross, rose from the dead, claimed to be God, there is one God. These are the arguments, you can find them in Romans 10:9, 10:10, which show that if this stuff is true, then Christianity must be true. If Jesus never claimed to be God, then Christianity is false. Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity is false. Those are the arguments. So when you start bringing up that the Bible is in worse case than the Quran, number one, it doesn't matter a thing, because the Quran relies upon its textual preservation. The Bible does not. It relies upon the historical truths of Jesus' death and resurrection. Beyond that, Osama said something that was very interesting. He said, the stories that I was telling you about the preservation of the Quran are now found in Sahih. Let me tell you, almost a large proportion of my arguments were from very trustworthy hadiths. For example, in Bukhari, it said that only 4 people had the Quran memorized by the time Muhammad died. In Sahih Bukhari, it also says that Ubay had taken a verse from, here, let me read it to you. Ubay was the best of us in recitation, Umar is talking, yet we leave some of what he recites. Ubay says, I have taken it from the mouth of Allah's apostle and will not leave it for anything whatever. So one of Muhammad's top 4 teachers of the Quran is saying, yes, I had a verse and you guys don't recite it. And this is found in the most trustworthy collection of these, Sahih Bukhari. It is then conferred by Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Tirmidhi, Hakim, and Itqan. So we have 5 different sources which say this. Sahih al-Muslim says that Muhammad forgot verses of the Quran. It also says, we used to recite a surah which resembled length and severity, Surah Barat. However, we have forgotten it except for one verse. So here you have more confirmation that people have forgot stuff from the Quran coming from the second most trustworthy book of Islamic tradition. Sahih Bukhari also said that there was a verse of stoning, and it's no longer there. We also have another statement from Sunan Abu Dawud, which says that Muhammad forgot verses. Jami' al-Tirmidhi includes statements by Ibn Masud. Yusuf Ali himself, again from this Quran, says that Ubay had contained verses and words in the Quran that are not found here today. So to simply say, oh, these aren't trustworthy, I'm not the one who's not doing my homework, my friend. If you say these stories, these accounts are not trustworthy, then you are leveling the finger at all the early Muslims who collected everything you know about Islam. And to deny these people would be to deny all the traditions you have about Islam. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to say throw out all these sources, then throw out your own religion and be consistent. He then says to me, why don't you turn to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene? Why don't you turn to these verses, such as the infancy Gospel of Thomas? The problem with this is I don't want to turn to late books of the New Testament. I don't want to turn to late books well after Jesus' time to get my history. I want to turn to the earliest books, and we do have books that are within decades after Jesus, such as the book of Mark and the book of John even. The last of the 4 Gospels was not written any later than 70 to 80 years after Jesus' death. But what about accounts about Muhammad? If I want to turn to them, the most trustworthy, Sahih al-Bukhari, is written centuries after Muhammad's death. We know nothing about him except from these sources that I have been quoting from, which say that he was demon-possessed, that he tried to jump off cliffs. They also say things like he was a victim of black magic. They say all kinds of things in these books, and these are the earliest stories I can turn to. So to say to me I need to be consistent, I am being consistent. I wish I had the same in response from you. You then argued that the ahruf are not revelations from God. Your statement was that the ahruf were something that came about from the people in the area. It was actually only revealed in the Qureshi dialect. However, let me recite to you from Sahih al-Bukhari again, the most trustworthy source of hadith. Muhammad says, it was revealed in this way. The Quran has been revealed in 7 ahruf. So my friend, I'm trying my best to go to the best sources. There's just so much here that's in your best sources that tell us that the Quran is not well preserved. I would love to continue talking about it if you wanted to. The last thing you said about this issue was that these evidences about the corruption of the Quran were, quote, lies that were invented. Well, by whom? I'm using Muslim sources. I'm using the earliest Muslim sources to tell me all these things. So are you saying Muslims invented their own stories about the corruption of the Quran? I don't think so. And if they invented them, they must have invented them really early because I'm using the earliest sources. It just simply does not hold water to throw out these accounts without any reason. Finally, you provided the statement that the literary excellence argument doesn't work because it's talking about in Arabic. Problem is, Ali Dashti knew Arabic. He was an Arabic grammarian, and he said the Quran was not excellent literary character. The true Furqan is written in Arabic, and people confuse it for the Quran. Al-Nadir and Abdullah ibn Sad were working in Arabic, and they all said that the Quran was not the best product that could be possible. Finally, in my last few seconds, I just want to comment on your statement of the mathematical marvels. You talked about how the verses of the Quran can be added up and the chapters of the Quran can be added up, and you got this number that's the same, and that must mean something. Number one, like I said before, it's non sequitur. But number two, keep in mind there are many Muslims who do not have the same number of verses in their Quran. A lot of people have different numbers of verses, and you're just using one harf of the Quran and saying that this is a mathematical marvel. Well, I'm sorry to inform you that there are many Muslims in the world who do not use that version of the Quran. They have different verses, different total number of verses, and your argument for mathematical marvels would not work, let alone the fact that we know the last 2 verses of Surah At-Tawbah might not have been included, let alone the fact that Aisha said hundreds of verses are missing. Even aside from all that, your mathematical marvels argument doesn't work, so I'm really looking forward to what you have to say in your next rebuttal.
Okay, gentlemen, and now we will have a 10-minute second rebuttal, starting with Osama.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Nabeel here mentioned a few points, several points rather. The English translation. First of all, I'd like to mention that the English translations are in many instances weak and even absurd. I even noticed in many noble verses that the English translators, which by the way, half of them are Western Americans and Europeans, folks like you, who translate the Quran from Arabic to English, which I'm not saying Arabic is impossible to learn, but you know, I noticed that a lot of them just copy from each other's or just rewrite the word, the verse in their own language or in their own style. That's why I refer to the Lisan al-Arab dictionary and the other several dictionaries, which I took snapshot, by the way, on. There's a total of 30 plus books. Okay, it's a huge library that I used to get these definitions that I presented to you. So, you know, if you want to use Yusuf Ali and the others, that's fine. You know, you can consider that a refutation to my analysis. But what I gave you is far deeper than all of your translations. As to the black magic, Allah Almighty brought it down on the Prophet to remove the nashra paganistic practice, because the pagans used to, when they have superstitious beliefs or something, they used to have this nashra paganistic practice, and the Prophet did not practice it. He rather used prayers and fasting to remove any magic spell on him, and it worked. So that was, and Nashra today practice does not exist in Arabia. As to the Book of Revelations on the scroll, yeah, you know what? The Bible has divine revelations in it, but unfortunately the Bible had been altered so many times, written, the Gospels and the books were written by unknown people, number of people, unknown places and unknown dates, and had been altered so many times that they're mixed between divine revelations and lies. You know, so yeah, you could have divine revelation in the Book of Revelation. I believe Jesus Christ will come back. He's my leader. He's my Lord. He's not my God, okay? But He's my leader. He's my Lord, okay? I will follow Him. He's the next prophet to come after Muhammad, okay? So there is a prophet to come, and that's Jesus Christ. So yeah, I believe in that, sure. On the four teachers, I did not get to that. I apologize. You're wrong. The Prophet did not say that only those four people are to be used for compilation of the Quran. In fact, none of this exists in the narration. The Prophet said that if you have any question on the Quran, these four people are the most knowledgeable of the Quran. So he recommended them. Okay, so if you have any question on the Quran, go to them, they'll answer you. They're the best source for you. That's what the hadith says. It has nothing to do with the compilation of the Quran. I guess I can just move on to the scientific miracles that I intended to give. Oh, by the way, as to the preservation, I answered that already, so okay, I'm just going through my notes here. How many minutes do I have, sir? I apologize. How many?
You have
1 minute?
You have this is 10 minutes, so you've got 7.
Okay, great. Thank you. 7 minutes? Perfect. I was going to go on to move on to this. Okay? Since so much speculations have been said here, I'm sure you get bored from it. Let's get to the real stuff here. Remember this here? God Almighty created us from a piercing and stabbing sperm. Well, Allah Almighty said in the Holy Quran, let me get it. Where is it? Where are you? Well, I'll just go through the whole thing then. Okay. Allah Almighty said in Noble Verse, chapter 76, verse 2, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ أَمْشَاجٍ Verily we created man from a drop of mingled sperm. Okay, according to Lisan Arab, nutfa is a single entity that is part of a bigger group of its kind. Okay, so a nutfa among us is a chosen person, is a representative. He's usually probably the most knowledgeable of us, or has something unique about him or her. Okay, that's a nutfa. النطفة also هي القطرة والواحدة في كل من كل ذلك نطفة. نطفة are the carrots. هي القرطة عفوا. I'm sorry. هي القرطة والواحدة من كل ذلك نطفة. نطفة is a carrot. It's like a carrot, and a single one is a nutfa. And here, so we know that Allah. So we know that the liquid that is emitted from the man. Okay, the semen. God Almighty said that we are created from a sperm, from a microscopic sperm from that. Okay, in this noble verse, and also here in noble verse chapter 23, verse 13. It says here, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاهُ نُطْفَةً فِي قَرَارٍ مَكِينٍ. Sulala, according to this here, book 6, page of 430 and through 436. Sulala is a singular of plural sulal and sulalat. Sulala is something that is drawn out or flowing. Okay? And also as-salil al-khalis as-safi, the best and the pure. Okay? Sulala, okay, is the best sperm from among the sperms that are ejected out. Okay, so if you eject 1 billion sperms, okay, a sulala, you created a sulala from those, the best one, the purest one, will be creating the man. Okay, show me something like this in your Bible, sir. Here also, I mean, I gave tons of definitions, but since time is running out here, I'm gonna move on. Where am I? Okay, yeah, here's the verse about this shape here. Noble verse, chapter 53, verses 45 and 46. وَإِنَّهُ خَلَقَ الزَّوْجَيْنَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. He created the two pairs, the male and the female. مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ إِذَا تَمْنَى. And that he creates the pairs, male and female, from a sperm drop that is emitted and is penetrating. Here, let me further prove it to you. And also here, noble verse, chapter 75, verse 37. أَلَمْ يَكُنْ نُطْفَةً مِّن مَنِيٍّ يُمْنَى. Was he not a drop of fluid emitted forth and is penetrating? Here, this is according to Lisan al-Arab, book 8, chapter 719, book 8, pages 719 through 721. Many, and yamna, many means semen, and yamna means to eject. Okay? And here many means daraba shay, striking something or stabbing something. And here's an example that they give, the Arabs of old use it. It is simna an ya'ti sahibuha fayadribuha biyadihi ala salaliha wa yanquru biha. Here also, when here the istimna is when the owner strikes with his hand on its salaha and continues to penetrate it. They use that when they want to check out, when they want to insert the hand into. I apologize for the females here. When the farmer inserts his hand into the cow, you know, for fertilization or whatever, or for checking it, the word is simna, which is derived from many. Okay, used in this noble verse. Okay, that's talking about this. Okay, means to penetrate. Okay, to penetrate, to pierce through. And here, yamni yudrab, stricken. Yamtani means here yudrab is stricken, is penetrated, is stricken with penetration. And they give examples here also. And here, many a shay ay qata'a. He mana something means he cut it. So it means to penetrate, to strike, to cut, to hit. It means all of those. And this, you know, and again, Allah Almighty said specifically, He created the pair, the male and the female, from this piercing and striking sperm. There are tons of other examples, but time did not serve me, so I apologize. Thank you very much.
All right, Nabeel.
Okay, so I want to first start off by saying there's many things that he mentioned here. We got 10 minutes to respond. First off, notice that he did agree that Muhammad was a victim of black magic. I do give you my respect for that. It is very clearly found in all the ancient sources, or not all the ancient, but many of the ancient Muslim sources, that Muhammad was a victim of black magic. And it takes an honest person to admit those things. But the very same sources say all sorts of other things as well. We'll be talking about that here shortly. The first argument he brought up in his rebuttal section is that the English translations are, quote, absurd. Note that the translations that we use are from Muslims themselves. So he has to argue that the Muslims are the ones producing the absurd translations. And if you want to argue that, there's still another problem, and that is that Arabic speakers are the ones making a lot of these claims. For example, Ali Dashti himself said that the Quran does not have a literary character that's not suspect. It definitely does require commentaries and whatnot to allow us to interpret it. Not only that, but the true Furqan is written in Arabic for Arabic speakers, and many Muslims will not be able to say that they can tell the difference between the Quran and the true Furqan, which means that the test is not for you, first off, it's for the non-believers, but beyond that, it's for it's the people themselves are saying that they can't figure out the difference, and the test therefore fails. Finally, I would like to say, who cares if these are translations? How much can you lose in translation when you have statements that say that parts of the Quran are lost, chapters of the Quran are lost, surahs of the Quran are lost, surahs of the Quran have been eaten by goats, Muhammad forgot surahs, people only remember certain surahs in certain cases, people don't think the last two verses of a surah actually exist, should be part of the Quran. You see this over and over and over again. You have many, many different sources for it. I mean, I have pages worth of sources for this stuff. How much can you possibly lose in translation? You end up with more and more and more evidence. One thing that I do want to point out at this point is that he says, well, look at your Bible. Again, he's talking about the Bible being altered. First off, this debate is about the Quran, and so bringing up the Bible is irrelevant. But if you want to go there, let's think about this for a moment. What can be altered? What are the requirements you need to uniformly corrupt a manuscript? Now, let's say, for example, a man named Mark was going to write a manuscript. Let's say he wrote it down, and it was copied and sent to various places, and whatnot. What would need to happen in order for Mark's gospel to be uniformly corrupted would be for all of those gospels to then be collected, and one authority to do the collecting, to make the changes, and then for everything else to be burnt or destroyed by some means or another. That's something you need to have happen. Otherwise, if someone just took one of the manuscripts and made a change, we would be able to determine from other manuscripts that a change has been made. Also, if someone didn't collect all of these things, then something would have gotten away. Let's compare this to the Quran. In the Quran's case, you do have someone who's in control of all the manuscripts. That person did go and collect everything, and he did burn all the alternate evidence. So the three things you absolutely need for something to be uniformly corrupted are absolutely present in Islamic history and are never present in the New Testament history. So one cannot simply say that the New Testament was corrupted without any reason, any evidence. I mean, show me in any case in ancient manuscripts where it is said that the New Testament has been corrupted. On the other hand, when I turn to earliest Muslim sources, very trustworthy Muslim sources, what do we see over and over and over again? The things were collected by one person, they were revised, and then everything else was burnt, and now we've got stuff missing. Left and right, people say we've got stuff missing. Now, Osama takes issue against my using Abdullah ibn Masud. I would like to quote from Sahih Bukhari, again, the most trustworthy collection of Muslim hadith. Masruq said, "This is the man I love, as I heard the Prophet saying, learn the Quran from four. From Abdullah ibn Masud, he started with him. And then Salim, then Abu Hudayfa, then Mu'adh bin Hanbal, then Ubay ibn Ka'b. Two of Muhammad's top four teachers ended up with Qurans that are very different from today's Quran. This tells us what? If anything, either number one, Muhammad was a poor chooser of his teachers of the Quran, or two, the Quran itself has been corrupted, and his teachers were proclaiming this, and no one was listening to them." It's really hard to ignore this evidence when it's all over the place. Number three, we're talking about now, returning back to the science arguments from scientific accuracy. Follow this. If we have a book and someone says, well, you should believe this book is from God, and I say, why? Why should I believe it's from God? And they say, because it has such amazingly accurate scientific statements. There's two things I would do. First, I would investigate those claims and see if they are actually amazingly scientific. And two, I would investigate all the scientific claims and see if there are those that are not scientifically accurate. First and foremost, we know that the clear statements are very, very wrong. For example, the statement about sperm coming from between the backbone and ribs. No, that's so wrong, it's mind-boggling. And yet, I'm supposed to look at that book and say this book is miraculous in its knowledge of science? Absolutely not. That's a clear statement. This statement about the sperm here, that's a clear statement. What is an unclear statement? An unclear statement is an example of the one he just gave, 53, 45 to 46. Here, let me read you the translation. He, God, created pairs, the male and the female, from the small seed when it is adapted, and that on him is the bringing forth a second time. And that is he it is who enriches and gives to hold. What does that mean? You can interpret that in many different ways, but what I can tell you is it is definitely not a clear scientific statement like sperm comes between backbone and ribs. That's clear. This is very unclear, and it hardly says anything about stabbing sperm. You start seeing people read into these unclear statements and say, if you keep digging and reinterpreting, then you can see this miraculous statement. And I say, first, you have super clear statements that are definitely scientifically inaccurate. Then you're having to really search to find something and try to really strain and pull to make it scientifically accurate. This argument is just flawed on multiple accounts. So bringing up embryology, again, I love talking about this stuff. I studied it for years in med school. Just in the Quran, it is not accurate, and it's certainly not accurate, and it's certainly all these statements that you're using about nebula, about clouds, about rain, about the moon being split. If they're clear statements, they're wrong, and if they're unclear statements, they're taken out of context to try to prove something. And we see over and over again that it's just simply not working. How much time do I have left?
You have 2 minutes.
So, at this point, I would like to say that we have gotten many, many reasons to not think that the Quran is the miraculous Word of God. First, the sketchy textual history combined with the initial revelation, seeming satanic. Muhammad himself said that he received satanic revelation. Oh, and Osama did bring that up. He said, no, this is a lie against Islam. There were no satanic revelations in the Quran. Well, let me tell you this. The statement that there are satanic revelations in the Quran that Muhammad himself admitted is found in 37 different places. So keep in mind, the Satanic Verses account goes back to 37 ancient sources, not one sketchy source, not two, 37 different sources. 6 go back to one person, 5 go back to another, 2 go back to another, 5 go to another, 2 go to another, 1 comes from another one, 4 comes from another person, and we have 8 more that go to different people. But as you can see, you don't have just one person saying this. And if this is a lie invented against Islam, well, who's the one doing the inventing? These are all Muslims who are quoting this. So who's doing the inventing? Is it Muslims themselves? And if Muslims themselves are not trustworthy to provide a history of Islam, then why should we believe anything of the history of Islam? I'm bringing quotations from Sahih Bukhari, which shows that parts of the Quran have been corrupt. I'm bringing quotations from Sahih Muslim that says Muhammad forgot parts of the Quran, that there are verses missing from the Quran. I'm bringing verses from Abu Dawood. I'm bringing verses from Tirmidhi. I'm bringing verses from Ibn Majah that says Aisha's goat ate stuff. All of the most trustworthy hadiths I have brought to you, and you've rejected them all. I ask you, what is your criteria for accepting ancient evidence? Please, from now on, provide us your criteria before questioning mine.
Gentlemen, we've now come to the part of the debate where we will be doing crossfire. We'll do 4 rounds with each debater getting 2 minutes. One will ask a question of the other, and the other will answer. And we're going to start with Osama's question.
Okay, Mr. Nabeel, you keep saying that Muslims have invented this. I mean, it's the same thing with you. I mean, Christians have also invented Jesus kissing Mary Magdalene on the mouth, right? I guess. Your sources, your rejected sources, most of them come from here, sir. And those quotes that you brought from the strong hadith, these are not hadiths. These are narrations, okay, that are considered today fabrications on the mouths of these people, of these true companions. So it is said that the companion said something, but it's a lie on his mouth. And I brought you examples from Waqidi and other narrators whom you rely heavily on in your narrations that are proven to be liars, forgers, fabricators of quotes. So my question to you is, why can't you accept the fact that many of the why can't you accept the Muslim position today about filtering out the lies and falsehoods and our acceptance of the Holy Quran, which, by the way, many numerical and scientific miracles testify for it, not just this singular numerical miracle. There are at least 15 on my website, but I couldn't bring them all. So why can't they all be true? Why should your speculations that are similar to your Bible, Gospel of Philip, Jesus kissed Mary, why isn't it Christians kissed? Why isn't it that Christians fabricated this on Jesus? True Christians. Why couldn't it have been true Christians fabricated this on Jesus, and yet here it's true Muslims that fabricated lies on Islam? You're not making any sense. Please explain.
Before we start timing, let me see if I get your question right. You're saying, why don't I agree with the fact that these statements are fabrications when I think that the kissing of Mary Magdalene on the mouth is a fabrication? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I mean, you have things on Jesus in your sources that you reject. You say, no, they were invented by liars, not by true Christians. And the Gospel of Philip was one of the disciples, okay? It's words in his mouth. You
Okay.
consider it lies.
Okay.
Why can't these be lies also?
Excellent question. Now, the reason why that is because the books that I'm referring to from Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, I didn't even refer to Waqidi once, by the way. You can check the tapes. I never said that name. I'm referring to Sahih Bukhari, I'm referring to Sahih Muslim, I'm referring to Sahih Sitta. Muslims agree these are the most important books of transmission, and by far the majority of what I said is from those books. Now, when I don't use those books, I use books such as Ibn Ishaq or At-Tabari. But I haven't even used much of Tabari. I've used mostly Ibn Ishaq, and I've used as far as non-Sahih books are concerned. Now, what are these books? These books are the earliest sources that we have. So when I'm quoting something, I'm either quoting number one, the books that the Muslims say are the most trustworthy, or I quote number two, the very earliest sources that we have. That is why I don't reject them. Also, when I see these things that I'm saying, I'm finding multiple narrations. For example, when I'm quoting statements about Aisha's goat eating something, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Aisha's goat probably didn't eat anything. But then I realize it's in Sahih Sitta, Sunan Ibn Majah, if you consider that one Sahih Sitta. It's also in 3 other sources. So you have 4 different sources saying the same thing. So what you have is by the methods of historical investigation, you go to any historian and you ask them, how do you investigate things? They say, number 1, we go to early testimony. Number 2, we see multiple attestation. How many people said it? How early was it? That's what I'm using. I'm using multiple sources, and I'm using the earliest sources. And on top of that, just to be nice, I'm using Sahih Bukhari, which comes hundreds of years later. I'm using Sahih Muslim, which comes even later than that. I'm using the sources you're asking me to use, which are even later, and they also say things are corrupted. So the fact of the matter is, everything agrees with me that the Quran has things that are missing in it. And in fact, Muslims are taking verses out of the Quran even today, such as the people who follow Khalifa in his approach. So to ask me why do I not accept these late Gnostic Gospels that came hundreds of years after Jesus, hundreds of years after the Gospels, and accept these early sources of Islam as comparing apples and oranges? Do I get to ask a question?
All right. No.
Do I get to counter that? Or?
No.
Just back and forth? 2
Yeah,
minutes?
just back and forth.
Okay, so it's my turn.
Nabeel, that's your question.
No, 2 minutes back and forth.
Okay, so now it's my turn to... Oh wait, so I'm just...
Now, Osama needs to reply 2 minutes.
Oh, so I could have asked a question in that. Okay, all right, go ahead.
Okay, so, well, first of all, when I said Waqidi and all those other ones, and there are several others in these books, the chain of narrations, folks, let me just explain this, because he's confusing you. For every hadith, every narration that you see, there's a chain of narrators in it, okay? What he's quoting, what he's telling you, the person who narrated, is that the companion of the Prophet. But the chain of narrators, okay, is weak. And these liars that I mentioned here, that are mentioned in this book, exist in these narrations, in these chains, okay? So there is forgery that happened in between. So that's why I said these are lies that were put on their mouths, okay? So, and as to, by the way, the sperm between the back and the rib, spinal injuries, you're going to be a doctor, right? If you fall from the horse on your back, okay, you run into a big risk of not being able to produce kids for the rest of your life, right? Okay? So it is related to the production, okay?
Okay.
I'm not a doctor, okay? But the sperm does also originate from the back, from especially the lower back, between the ribs and the backbone. That's the lower back area.
I apologize. Please keep going.
I know that testicles are what generates the semen, okay? But there are other physiological, in our anatomy, physiological things are linked to it. That's why when you have spinal injury, you won't be able to produce kids anymore. So it makes sense to me, okay? And maybe that's an area that needs to be researched further. Maybe by you. And as to the shooting stars, the Noble Quran says shihab, doesn't say stars. Okay, you're wrong. And there are cosmic rays, there are dark matter, okay, and there are billions of comets and stars in our solar system by itself. Billions of comets. I quoted NASA on this.
You got to call one time zone.
And yeah, sure, it's possible. Why not call one time zone?
All right.
Okay, so the statement is that the fluid that produces a baby issues forth from in between your ribs and your backbone. to say that, okay, there was a spinal injury that caused, the L4, L5 region or the S5 region of the body to not be able to work anymore, and now you're not going to be able to produce sperm. You're trying to invoke scientific statements and try to make it sound really nice and fluffy in order to try to make something work that just simply doesn't work. It's saying fluid comes forth from the ribs in the back. My ribs are here, my backbone is here. My pelvis is nowhere near that. So to try to get things to make them work and then say, look how beautiful this scientific statement is, doesn't work at all. Now, what I would like to say, however, is that he's been commenting over and over again that I'm using shoddy sources. Let me first say this to you. My first statement that I provided was from the son of Umar, who was a Khalifa. This was recorded by Abu Ubayd, who was removed only 3 people away from Ibn Umar. And every single person in this train of narration is pure as gold when it comes to their reliability. He says, let no one of you say that he has acquired the entire Quran, for how does he know that it is all? Much of the Quran has been lost. Beyond that, it's like I mentioned, the sources from Ibn Abbas, the sources from Bukhari, the sources from Muslim, they're all saying the same things. There's verse of stoning in Bukhari. Muhammad forgot in Sahih Muslim. He forgot in Abu Dawud. In Tirmidhi, we see Ibn Masud getting upset. In Yusuf Ali, we see from Yusuf Ali, we see Ubay being quoted. The 2 verses at the end of Tawbah that are missing, that's from Tirmidhi. The fact that Aisha's goat ate something is from Sayyid Sitta. It's also from Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ibn Qutayba, Shafi. The verse of suckling that was lost is also confirmed in Sahih Muslim. The missing section of chapter 2, verse 238 is found in Jami al-Tirmidhi from Muwatta Imam Malik as well. We also have the verse of stoning found in Sahih al-Muslims, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Muhasabi, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Dawood, Ibn Qutayba, Salama, Bayhaqi, as well as Bukhari. And you're saying that I'm just using shoddy sources? I'm using every source in the book, literally. And to just say, oh, Waqidi is not trustworthy, I didn't even use Waqidi. So my question to you is, why in the world should I not use these sources? I mean, you keep saying, why are you using them? Why shouldn't I?
Well, first of all, I'd like to respond to your laugh also, sir. If I break an arm, I can still have a child, okay? And I have a child. I didn't break my arm yet, but if I were to break my arm today, I can still have a child. If I were to break my back, I'm done, okay? I cannot have children anymore, okay? So it is related. I'm not a doctor, I can't explain it, but there is there, okay? Maybe you're ignorant about it, it doesn't make it wrong, okay? Maybe that's an area for you, sir, as a doctor to research, okay? If I break an arm, I can still have a child. If I break my back or hurt my back, fall on my back, I run into a risk of disabling myself from having children anymore. It is related to reproduction. It's very related. It's very linked. It's very relevant. As to the sources, there are 2 million narrations in our databases. Our scholars went through every single one of them, and they determined what is accepted and what is not accepted. And they didn't just do it by wishful thinking. They analyzed every single person, his history, and they listed all the doubtful people, the people who are known to be gossipers, liars, hypocrites, infidels, okay? Jews who tried to mask themselves into Muslims, okay? I'm not saying all Jews are evil, but that there was a conflict at one time where many pretended to be Muslims and tried to forge false narrations, and those people were exposed. Okay, we have a long list of people who are authentic and not authentic, and the chain of narration has those people, and those people are analyzed. So those quotations that you brought, sir, you brought them from the dumpster. We threw those narrations out. Okay, I mean, they're not accepted. Otherwise, we would have a big chaos in our Islamic world today. Today, there's only one in the 1.2 or 1.5 billion Muslims. Among those people, there's one Holy Quran, and we do not dispute about it. In your Bible, it's different. You have many Bibles.
So you're saying maybe I should do research into why breaking an arm doesn't cause you to stop having a child? Number one, I don't think any research is necessary to figure that out. People know that very well now. But number two, people knew that even in Muhammad's time. I guarantee you there are people who broke their backs in Muhammad's time and they weren't having kids. So to say these are scientifically miraculous statements is just flawed because it's obvious knowledge to everyone.
I didn't say this was a science.
Beyond that, it's my turn to respond, please. You're calling Bukhari and Muslim garbage. You're saying that their work is refuse to which people have... He is right. There were a lot of people who went through a whole ton of narrations and they determined which one of those are accurate and which ones aren't, and they put their name on it. So it is said of Bukhari that he went through millions of statements, or at least it was 500,000, and he brought it down to just a few thousand statements that he said were attributed to Muhammad. And in those statements, we see such things as Ubay reads stuff in the Quran that we do not read anymore, and that is then confirmed by many other sources. And then it is said that Ubay, who is one of the top 4 teachers of the Quran, was teaching these things to his people. So what we know for a fact is that even the people who you consider the best of scholars say that the Quran hasn't been perfectly preserved. And you say, well, why isn't the Muslim world in a tizzy about this? I wonder, why not? They should look at this stuff and know. I know that I didn't know this stuff really when I was a Muslim. I had to research it and then find out. And that's why we're having these debates so that other Muslims can see. Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah, At-Tirmidhi, all Sahih Sitta, as well as other books, as well as the books of Sirah, are talking about the corruption of the Quran. Now, I would like you to respond and tell me, what should I say about these sources? Should I not use these sources? Bukhari is... Let me put this another way. Are there traditions in Bukhari that are not trustworthy? Are there traditions in Muslim that are not trustworthy? And if those are not trustworthy, then why are the other traditions in those books trustworthy?
Good question. Thank you very much. Yes, there are, sir. There are narrations, and they are listed that are not trustworthy, and yours are among them. Okay? Bukhari is not, he called his book Sahih Bukhari, authentic, and his narrations, the ones that he selected, are among the strongest. However, his selections contain hadiths, sayings of the Prophet, direct quotations of the Prophet, and words or narrations about the Prophet. Such and such person said something about the Prophet, or something about someone, like the narration about Ubay, Ubay could have been wrong, by the way. The Noble Quran has 6,236 noble verses. Caliph Uthman, okay, he did not compile anything, just like Constantine. He did not compile the Bible. It was the canon that you have. It was the scholars that he gathered. Same thing. There were, I believe, 70 scholars, if I'm not mistaken, Quranic scholars, that went through the painstaking effort to compile the entire Noble Quran. So Ubay could have made a mistake. I mean, my God, there are 6,236 noble verses, okay? I mean, even if the guy is a top scholar of the Quran, he could still make a mistake. Come on, I mean, he could have the best memory in the world and still make mistakes. I mean, that's assuming the narration about him is true to begin with, okay? But to answer your question, sir, yes. Many of the narrations, sayings, are disputed in even those authentic hadiths, and there are books that were printed in Saudi Arabia and others by scholars that have those listed. So,
Is it my turn?
that's common. I mean, that's known worldwide among the Muslims.
20 seconds.
Done.
So you said...
Actually, can I use the 20 seconds? I'm sorry. About the backbone thing. Again, the arm, I know it's irrelevant. What I'm saying is, it's the fact that if you break your back, you hurt your back, it will damage, your testicles will not able to generate the semen. They will generate the semen, but the sperms will come out of it because of your damage, because of your injury to your back. That's relevant.
Time's up. The statement was not that you can't have babies.
It's relevant. It's relevant to it.
It's my turn to speak, please.
Okay.
The statement was not that you can't have babies if you break your back. Now you're trying to make a stretch. The statement was there's fluid coming between the ribs and the backbone. There is no such fluid that comes between the ribs and the backbone.
It says originates.
Please, it is my time to speak.
But you're misquoting the Quran. It says originates from it.
It does not originate between the ribs and the backbone. It originates from the pelvis.
Investigate it.
I showed you a picture.
Okay, go
It's
ahead.
been well investigated. You can go to any first-year anatomy student and they'll tell you that.
Okay, I'll break my back and I'll still have children then, right?
Please give Nabeel a little more time for this.
In addition to this, you're saying Ubay could be wrong. Well, I would have to ask, why in the world is Muhammad picking 4 teachers to teach the Quran, one of whom says that there's less chapters that belong in the Quran. There's one who says that there's stuff missing in the Quran, there should be even more chapters. So Muhammad is apparently inept at picking his teachers. Is that what you're saying? I don't think so. I think Muhammad's good at picking his teachers, but according to you, Ubay could have been wrong. Muhammad's picking bad teachers. And also you're saying that the verses in these traditions that come after Muhammad's death are weak. Well, of course the verses about collecting the Quran are after Muhammad's death, because the Quran wasn't collected until after his death. So there's no possible way Muhammad could say, oh, the collection of the Quran was flawed. It happened after he died. So to say that these verses are not trustworthy just because they come after Muhammad's death is trying to circumvent the actual issue at hand. Finally, you say there are Muslims who are going through these verses and they say, no, these verses about the Quran not being perfectly preserved, these are not trustworthy. What do you think a Muslim's going to say? People have their own natural biases. Everyone has their own biases. When I was a Muslim, I had the similar biases you have now. Now that I'm a Christian, I have different biases. The fact of the matter is, when you have a bunch of Muslims saying, throw out all the verses that say the Quran is corrupt, that could be related to their bias. And in fact, when we use appropriate criteria to investigate whether or not these verses should be trusted, we see it in so many places, in so many instances, saying the same thing in various different ways. The statements can't get any stronger.
All right, that's your time. All right, we are at the end of the debate. Thank you, gentlemen. We are going to have one last section, which will include 5-minute conclusions from both Osama and Nabeel. Starting with you, Osama.
Thank you, ma'am, and I apologize if I offended anybody. My dear Nabeel, my dear friend, that is why I'm bringing to you, I'm submitting to you the scientific miracles of the Holy Quran to settle all this doubt and speculations, all these things once and for all. Okay, our scholars and the scholars of Uthman, okay, they came up with the Quran. Our scholars didn't come with the Quran. The scholars of Uthman came up with the Quran that we have today, and our scholars agree with it 100%. And the scientific miracles that we have today testify to it. So you just have to look at the Quran in a more honest way, and you'll see the truth. I promise you. Okay, otherwise you're just speculating. You know, there's 2 million narrations to speculate from, so yeah, good luck. I'd like to, in my conclusion, present one more scientific miracle here. God Almighty said in Noble Verse chapter 96, verse 15, كَلَّا لَإِن لِمَنْ نَفْسِهَا بِالنَّاصِيَةِ نَاصِيَةٌ كَاذِبَةٌ خَاطِئَةٌ Nay, if he desists not, we will certainly smite his forehead, that's in the day of judgment, a lying and sinful, or actually mistaken, or erroneous forehead. According to Lisan Arab, it's the forehead in Arabic. Okay? Now, this is the area here. This is a Western picture here. This is not Arabic or Muslim. Okay? The decisions that you make, whether you decide to lie, you decide to write, you decide to tell the truth, your decision making happens in your forehead area. It's called here, what happened here? It happens, what happened? It comes from the functional region of the hemisphere of the cerebral cortex. The prefrontal area is located at the front of the cerebral cortex. That's Essentials of Anatomy and Physiology, Seeley and others, page 210. And here it says, if we look into the skull of the front of the forehead, we will find the prefrontal area of the cerebrum. Okay, see figure 12, they had a figure for it. What does physiology tell us about the function of this area? A book entitled Essential Anatomy of Physiology that I just quoted says that this area, the motivation and the foresight to plan and initiate movements occur in the interior portion of the frontal lobes, and the frontal lobes, the prefrontal area, the frontal lobe, which is the prefrontal area. Okay, and here I have other books also that I could list here. But again, Allah Almighty said, He will drag you, or rather He will smite you, those who lie, those who sin, those who commit sins. He will smite them from their forehead, from their nasia, the erroneous and sinful forehead. Mr. Nabeel can argue here and say, no, doesn't say that. It does say that, okay? And Lisan Arab here, I quoted Lisan Arab saying that the Nasiya to the Arabs of old means the forehead. And the forehead is where we make our decisions. How could Muhammad have known all this, guys? Come on. You know? Why do you believe in why should you believe in, as my conclusion, why should you believe in his speculations and the anti-Islamic speculations and leave out the clear-cut divine truth that really cannot be made by man? Yeah, you can write a book today, have a computer generate a book that has miracles in it, but it's not from God. It doesn't have the spirit, okay? This book has a spirit and has a scientific truth that was revealed for us. And God Almighty said in the noble verse that I narrated the first, in the beginning of my presentation, we will show them our signs in the universe and inside themselves until it will become clear to them that it is the truth from God. Okay? God gave this promise, divine promise, and it's being fulfilled today by NASA, by the doctors, by science, by geology, astronomy. You know, Muhammad didn't know any of this. He was an illiterate Bedouin. And even my respected opponent here gave examples on him, on the Prophet not being able to read. Okay? How could this guy who could not even read books know all this? And there are tons of other miracles that I didn't have a chance to get into. But, you know, hopefully you'll see the truth. My website is www.answering-christianity.com. Go to it, click on the scientific miracles of the Holy Quran. You'll see, I don't know, 50 plus miracles. Maybe more, actually.
This time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, Nabeel.
So we discussed today whether or not the Quran was miraculous. We saw from the very beginning that the inception of the Quran came fraught with problems, including psychiatric issues such as depression, anxiety, also concerns about possession, and even multiple attempts at suicide. Then we see Muhammad himself admitting, in at least 37 historical sources we see him admitting that he received revelations from Satan. Then we see him getting verses and discarding verses of the Quran, calling them abrogated. And then you see him reciting up to 7 different times a single verse and saying that these are all revelations from God. And then we see early Muslims collecting the Quran not until after Muhammad died. Just from the history itself, we see that there are significant problems with the claim that the Quran is miraculous. But then we go on to the other supposed miraculous claims, such as the literary miracle, which we know is not even sequitur, let alone possible, viable. Beyond that, we know that it has failed multiple times on multiple accounts. Mathematical marvels, we have seen that that's also non sequitur, and the one account that he did bring, again, simply did not match up because of the different verses and the different accounts of the different verses that can be found in the Quran. Today's debate focused, however, mostly on the scientific accuracy, and I do want to re-emphasize the fact that every single statement that the Quran makes that he proposes as a scientifically accurate miracle was either, number one, taken out of context, did not say what he said it said. Number 2, was blatantly inaccurate. Or number 3, was something that everyone obviously knew. We talked a little bit about embryology. We talked about how the sperm, the fluid that comes, that produces a baby, exists between a man's backbone and his ribs. That is just so fallacious, it boggles my mind that anyone could continue to say it. That's just one of the statements about embryology, by the way. Another one that's found in chapter 23 of the Quran says, we placed him as a sperm in a place of rest, firmly fixed. Then we made the sperm into a clot of congealed blood. Then of that clot we made a lump. And then we made that lump of bones and clothed it with flesh. Then we developed out of it another creature. So blessed be Allah, the best to create. I mean, this is wrong in so many ways. It's mind-boggling. At first he says that a sperm drop becomes a clot. No drop of sperm then congeals. The congealing process is in an entirely different place in the body. It's with the blood. Beyond that, he then says that you have a lump of bones that was then clothed in flesh. Even pre-med students know that's not true. Bones and flesh come from the same embryonal layer of a fetus. They come from the mesoderm. The mesoderm produces the bones and the flesh at the same time. So when the Quran says first he produced it with bones and then it was clothed in flesh, this is just completely inaccurate. So what you have are scientific statements, clear ones that the Quran provides, that are just wrong. And then Osama asks us to weigh those against these fantastic concepts, which he says are truth and proof that God is revealing the Quran because they're so accurate it boggles the mind. Of these kinds of statements, someone has said, a Muslim scholar has said. Let me see if I can find it for you. Well, basically what he says is, it is not up to Muslims to find every fanciful interpretation of the Quran to try to make it scientifically accurate. Over-imaginative Muslims have tried over and over and over again to make the Quran scientifically accurate. According to God, you don't need to do that. There are other miracles. But I say you can try finding any kinds of miracles you want in the Quran. You're not going to be able to find them. And also the debate focused a lot on the preservation of the Quran. Is the Quran actually the Quran? Or is something else supposed to be the Quran? How about the 116 chapter version, or the 111 chapter version, or the version which has hundreds of more verses in Surah 33, or the verses of stoning and suckling? Are those supposed to be part of the Quran? According to many ancient sources, yes, they are. And so to call the Quran today the Quran is actually kind of a misnomer when so many people say there are parts of it that are missing. And we know from this fact alone, according to Surah 15, verse 9, the Quran has not been well guarded, and Allah, or whoever it was that inspired the Quran, was unable to keep the promise that was stated in that verse. What I'd like to end with is this. We do have a Word of God. We do have a Word, and we have a Word that was in the beginning with God, and that Word was God. And through that Word came all things that are in being. We know this because we know that the claims of Christianity are true, not because of scientific statements, not because of literary excellence, not because of perfect preservation, but because we know a man died on the cross and rose from the dead and claimed to be God, and that this man was Jesus Christ. We're going to be discussing these things later in this series. Next, in an hour or so, we'll be debating the crucifixion of Jesus. Please stick around, and it is my prayer that you'll see the fallacious Quran on the one side has a counterpart, something that is true, something that is eternal, something that does give us saving grace and salvation for all our souls. And that is the man, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. Are we going to do Q&A? No. All right. Yes, go ahead and give them a round of applause. We certainly heard a lot of good evidence presented today from the two very good presenters. I'd like to thank both Osama and Nabeel for all of their hard work in bringing this debate today. Let me give you again the websites for Osama is www.answering-christianity.com, and for Nabeel is www.acts17.net. Again, let me encourage you to thoughtfully consider the arguments that you have heard, and encourage you to come back tonight right here at 7 o'clock to hear David Wood debate Osama. And also tomorrow we'll have two more debates with David and Nabeel and Farhan Qureshi at Jackson Memorial Baptist Church. First one at 3 o'clock to 5:45, and the second one at 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out tonight, and thank you to the debaters.
Thank you.